before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I still feel my heart pounding just thinking about what happened last night. I can't forget how my legs felt like concrete when I tried to move. It started so simply. I was in my living room scrolling through my phone, waiting for my friend to arrive. He had texted me that he'd be over soon. I was anxious because we had some plans to discuss, and I kept checking the clock on the wall. Time was going slow, and I was getting restless. When the doorbell rang, I felt a rush of relief. Finally, my friend was here. I jumped up from the couch and headed straight to the front door. My hallway has a small overhead light, and it's never been very bright. I opened the door, expecting to see him right there with his usual grin. But nobody was outside. The air was still and the porch was empty. I leaned out, glanced left and right, but there was no one. The only unusual thing was a strange shadow on the ground in the corridor outside my door. It looked like it came from someone standing just out of my line of sight, but there was no one there. I blinked a couple of times, trying to adjust my eyes, but the shape didn't make sense. It was just this blurry outline, barely distinguishable, yet definitely present. It didn't belong to any object I could see. It looked almost like a smudge of darkness rather than a crisp silhouette. I felt a slight chill, but I told myself it was probably a trick of the light. Maybe the overhead fixture was flickering, or I was seeing a reflection from somewhere. I said hello into the hallway, but got nothing back. My voice echoed a bit. My neighbor's door remained closed, and the corridor was silent. I hesitated before shutting the door, then finally closed it. The latch clicked and I locked it, thinking I might be overreacting. The moment I turned around, I heard 3 soft knocks on the wall in my living room. They were spaced out like someone gently tapping. My living room is on the other side of the short hallway, and there's no direct way for someone outside to tap on that wall. I froze, listening hard. My heart thumped in my chest and my ears felt sensitive to every small noise. I walked slowly toward the living room, checking the windows. They were closed, and all the curtains were drawn. I didn't see any sign of forced entry. Everything was still the way I'd left it. The remote on the coffee table, a glass of water on a coaster, some magazines in a stack. The knocks had sounded so real, though. I stood in the middle of the room and tried to decide what to do next. My thoughts were racing. That was when I noticed it. The temperature felt different. The room seemed colder than it had been 10 minutes earlier. I rubbed my arms to warm up and realized I had goosebumps. It was like a sudden drop, not the normal nighttime chill. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Still, I told myself maybe the AC had kicked in unexpectedly. I walked over to check the thermostat, but everything was in its usual setting. There was a faint draft against the back of my neck. I spun around, expecting to see an open window or door. Nothing was open. No air was moving, yet I felt a slight brush of cold wind pass by me. My eyes scanned the room, but nothing looked amiss. I heard my own breath grow heavier. My palms were getting sweaty. It felt like the air itself was pressing in on me. I decided to go back to the door and wait for my friend properly. Maybe the doorbell had been a glitch, or he'd rung it and walked back to his car. But as soon as I stepped out into the hall, I remembered the shadow I'd seen outside. I decided to glance through the peephole to check if anything was there. It's a narrow view, but I couldn't see anyone. The hallway was empty. I opened the door once more. The corridor light looked the same, dull and weak. The shadow was still there on the floor. It hadn't moved too far, but I swear it was closer to my doorstep than before. It had this faint movement to it, like it was shifting in place. My stomach tightened. I felt a wave of fear pass through me. I forced myself to step forward, just enough to see if there was anything around the corner. But the corridor was clear. Nothing else was out of place. I walked back inside and quickly locked the door again. I decided to check every room in my apartment. I went to the kitchen, turned on the light, opened the cabinets, checked the pantry. Nothing. Then I checked the bathroom and bedroom. Everything was in order, no windows open, no trace of anything unusual. I returned to the living room, feeling uncertain. That's when I heard a scraping sound coming from near the couch. It was quiet, like something brushing against the floor. I looked around the floor by the couch. Nothing there. I even moved the coffee table a little. Then I heard it again, behind me. It was closer to the hallway wall. It reminded me of the sound of fabric dragging across a wooden surface. I turned around fast, but the noise stopped. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My mind was racing with possibilities. An animal, something in the vents, or maybe I was losing it. I reached for my phone, thinking I might call my friend or even the front desk of the building. That's when the overhead light in the living room flickered. It was just a brief flicker, but enough to set my nerves on edge. I lifted my phone, but there was no message or missed call from my friend. He was running late, or maybe he'd changed his mind. I typed out a text asking if he was still coming, but I hesitated to hit send. Somehow I felt like I should stay quiet, though I couldn't explain why. I checked the hallway one more time through the peephole. The shadow was still there, and it seemed a bit bigger. I couldn't figure out how it was growing if there was no one around to cast it. My heart pounded so hard I felt slightly dizzy. The skin on the back of my neck tingled. It was hard to breathe normally. I walked away from the door, deciding to sit in the living room and wait. I turned on a floor lamp to fill the room with more light, hoping that might make me feel safer. My eyes kept darting to the wall where I'd heard those knocks. Nothing seemed strange there anymore. The corners of the room were bright enough that I could see there was nothing lurking, but I still felt something in the air. After a few minutes, I heard a faint tapping near the window. It wasn't a knock, just a light tap. I went to the window, lifted the corner of the curtain, and looked outside. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few cars. I recognized my neighbor's sedan. There were streetlights casting a dull glow, and no one seemed to be standing around. Then I heard that scraping sound again, this time from behind me in the living room. I spun around, pulling the curtain fully shut. When I turned, I saw a slight ripple in the reflection of the TV screen. It was as if something had passed in front of it, but there was nothing there. I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. My eyes stayed locked on the TV screen, waiting to see any movement. There was nothing visible, but I felt a presence, like something was behind me. I turned my head quickly, but I still saw nothing. My legs felt weak, so I sat down on the couch. My body was tense. My hands were shaking a bit, and I wiped them on my pants. The living room was too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound. I tried to focus on that hum, but my thoughts were all over the place. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe my friend had pranked me somehow. But how would he manage a prank like this? He wasn't the type to go all in on such elaborate setups. And I'd locked the door. I kept telling myself it must be my nerves or an overactive imagination. Yet my senses were screaming that something else was in the apartment with me. I stood up and checked the door again, making sure it was locked tight. I even slid the chain into place. I pressed my ear against the door and listened. The hall was silent. I took a deep breath and stepped back. That's when I heard a faint shuffle coming from the bedroom. My bedroom door was half open. I had already checked the room before, so I felt a jolt of panic. I hurried down the small hallway leading to the bedroom. My heart was hammering and my limbs felt jittery. I flipped on the bedroom light. The bed was undisturbed, the dresser drawers were closed, and the closet door was shut. I opened the closet and shoved aside a few hanging shirts. No one was inside. Then I heard a faint creak from the corner near the window. It was the floorboard. I was sure of it. I turned to face that corner, but it was empty. The curtains were drawn, and there was nowhere for anyone to hide. Still, I heard that creak, so I stepped closer, trying to see if the floorboard might be loose. I pressed it with my foot. It moved slightly, but it made a similar sound. Maybe that was it. Maybe the wood was just settling. I closed my eyes for a second. My breathing was heavy and shallow. and I felt a slight sweat on my brow. I decided to leave the bedroom lights on and head back to the living room. On my way, I thought I saw a shifting shape at the end of the corridor near the front door. It was low to the ground, almost blending with the shadows. I stopped walking and stared at it. It didn't move, but I knew it was there. My mind was screaming to turn away, to not engage with it. But I couldn't ignore something creeping around my own place. I took a slow step forward, and the shape seemed to draw back, almost like it was recoiling. My pulse thundered in my ears. I took another step and it faded into the darkness near the door. I rushed to the living room again, flipping on every light I could. I grabbed my phone and dialed my friend's number, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a brief message, something like, "Dude, where are you? I need you to call me right now." My voice shook a little. I sat back down, trying to steady my breathing. My legs bounced restlessly and my hands couldn't stay still. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Every little sound made me jump. The clock ticking on the wall felt louder than usual. I wiped my forehead and noticed how clammy my skin was. After a few minutes of tense silence, I decided I couldn't just sit there anymore. I figured I'd grab my jacket and wait outside for my friend. At least in the hallway, I could see if someone approached. If that weird shadow was still out there, I'd deal with it in the open. I stood up and walked carefully to the front door. I looked through the peephole one last time. The corridor light flickered weakly, and the shadow was right in front of my door. It looked like an oval smear of darkness, lacking any definite shape. I felt a spike of adrenaline. I didn't want to open the door if this thing was right there, but I also didn't want to stay inside with whatever was making those sounds. My hand shook as I placed it on the doorknob. I took a breath, unlatched the chain, and turned the key. I swung the door open. The corridor light buzzed softly. The shadow was on the floor, but it pulled back a few inches. I stayed in the doorway, holding the door open, watching it. I could see it more clearly now. It didn't have edges or distinct features. It was a black blur that seemed to absorb the light around it. My head started to spin because this made no logical sense. I wanted to run, but my legs were rooted to the spot. I stepped forward, 1 foot outside. The shadow shifted away, inch by inch, as if it was cautious. I felt my chest tighten with fear, but I kept going. It moved a little farther down the hallway, then stopped. I held my breath, taking another step. Suddenly, it flickered once and vanished. I stood there staring at the spot where it had been. There was only the worn carpet and the dull glow of the corridor light. I walked up and down the hallway to see if it had moved around the corner. Nothing. My mind was racing and my heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I made my way back to my door, not wanting to linger outside if it decided to come back. When I stepped inside, the apartment felt ice cold again. I pushed the door shut, locked it, and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. That was when my phone buzzed. My friend finally texted, "Sorry, got held up. Coming in 5." I stared at the screen, not sure how to explain anything. I typed back, telling him I'd meet him downstairs. I didn't want to stay in that apartment any longer. I grabbed my jacket and wallet, and I walked through every room once more, making sure the lights were off except for the living room lamp. I left quickly, locking the door behind me. As I walked down the hallway, I kept checking over my shoulder. That shadow was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was nearby, watching. My heart was still pounding. I reached the elevator and pressed the button, glancing back at my door, expecting to see something. Nothing appeared. The elevator arrived, and I stepped in. On the ride down, my reflection in the stainless steel walls showed a sweaty, nervous face. I tried to breathe in and out, slow and steady, but my hands were still shaking. My mind replayed every sound, every moment of that cold, eerie presence. I had no idea what it was. I just knew it had been real, because I felt it in my bones. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, I stepped out and looked around. The normal lights and the random chatter from a few neighbors made me feel less afraid. I forced a small smile at the security guard, but he just nodded back. I waited near the entrance, checking my phone, waiting for my friend's arrival. My heart was still racing, and I felt a chill that wouldn't leave me. I kept expecting to see that shadow slide up behind me, but it never did. I had no explanation for what happened, and I still don't. But I know one thing. Something got inside my place without being seen in any normal way. It left no physical trace except the cold air and those strange sounds. It took a shape that wasn't shaped at all. Even now, I'm not sure how I'll walk back into that apartment without remembering the knocks and the way it hovered near my feet. But I have to go back. It's my home and I can't abandon it. That feeling of being watched, though, isn't going away anytime soon. I heard the footsteps on my first night. They were heavy and steady, as if someone large was pacing back and forth. I stopped what I was doing and listened hard. But there was no voice, no sign that anyone else was around. My heart thumped against my ribcage because I knew I was alone in that chalet. At least I had thought I was alone when I signed the guest book and saw my name printed on the only line. I had driven there to clear my head and work on a new story. I chose that chalet because it was buried deep in a mountainous region, far from crowds and traffic. When I pulled up on the first day, I noticed the wood panels on the exterior looked worn, and the windows had a few cracks along the edges. The surrounding trees were thick and tall, blocking most of the sunlight by mid-afternoon. I liked the isolation, I wanted peace, and I expected silence. The caretaker handed me a single key, told me the place was all mine, and left without much conversation. That first evening, I cooked a small dinner in the chalet's tiny kitchen. The counters were old, but clean enough. The faucet dripped a little, but I ignored it. I sat at the narrow table near the window and tried to relax. The temperature dropped once the sun went down, so I moved to the living area and turned on the old radiator. I opened my laptop, thinking I might start brainstorming a few ideas, but the slow internet connection frustrated me. I shut the laptop and decided to go to bed. I picked the bedroom on the ground floor because it was close to the bathroom and felt more comfortable. There were bedrooms upstairs, but the caretaker had mentioned that the top floor hadn't been used in a while. The bed creaked when I lay down. I remember staring at the dark ceiling and wondering how old the chalet really was. There was a faint smell of dust and old wood, but nothing too strong. At some point, I fell asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a distinct thumping sound. My eyes snapped open. I stayed in bed for a few seconds, trying to figure out if it was a branch hitting the side of the chalet or maybe an animal scurrying around outside. Then the noise changed. It turned into the sound of heavy footsteps moving across the floor above me. I could imagine boots stomping from one side of the upstairs room to the other. My mouth went dry. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. There was no reason for anyone else to be there. I slid out of the bed and walked to the doorway. I flicked on the overhead light and it buzzed for a second before lighting up the small bedroom. The footsteps continued. I heard them cross from one end of the room to the other again. Part of me wanted to call the caretaker, but my phone had no signal, and the chalet's landline was in the living room. I figured I should check it out before I panicked. Maybe it was some kind of old house noise, though it sure didn't sound that way. I moved slowly down the hall, passing the bathroom. The living room was dark, lit only by the glow of a small lamp I had switched on earlier. The radiator hummed softly. I stood there, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound. The footsteps were definitely upstairs. They paused, then started again, crossing overhead. My hands felt clammy, and I wiped them on my pajama pants. My heart pounded against my chest like it was trying to get out. I approached the staircase. The wood banister felt rough under my palm, and the steps squeaked as I put my weight on it. With each step, I expected the footsteps above to stop, but they kept going. There was something in the air that made my skin prickle, like a static charge. I climbed the stairs one by one, holding my breath. I could hear my own heartbeat. I thought about turning around, but I felt compelled to keep going. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that no one was there. At the top of the stairs, I stood in a narrow hallway with 2 doors on each side and a larger door at the end. The overhead light in the hallway was dim, flickering a little. The footsteps sounded closer now, but they seemed to be coming from the far room on the left. I walked toward it, feeling the floorboards flex under my feet. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open. The room was empty. A dusty bed frame sat against one wall. A window faced the mountains outside, and a small dresser leaned in the corner. The footsteps paused for a second. I listened, waiting for them to resume. Then I heard them above my head, like someone had moved onto the roof or the attic. I looked up, but there was just the ceiling with a single overhead light fixture. No attic door in sight, no ladder, nothing that would let someone climb up there. The sound knocked again, thud, 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 moving across the ceiling. I stepped back into the hallway, feeling a chill run through my arms. The caretaker had not mentioned an attic, just the upstairs bedrooms. The noise up there was distinct, though. It felt like it was guiding me further. I glanced around the hallway, looking for any access panel. There was a small hatch in the ceiling near the end of the hall, almost flush with the plaster. It was square, maybe a couple of feet on each side. I hadn't noticed it on my initial look around. It had no visible handle, just a crack. I stared at it, trying to decide if I should attempt to open it in the middle of the night. I reached for a nearby wooden chair that stood against the wall. I dragged it under the hatch. The wood scraped against the floor. I climbed on top of the chair, wobbling a bit. The hatch was just high enough that I could press my fingertips against the edge. I pushed and it gave way slightly. Dust and bits of debris fell onto my face, making me cough. I steadied myself and pushed the hatch open. Cold air drifted out, along with a stale smell. It reminded me of old paper and forgotten boxes. I could barely see inside. I reached my hand up, half expecting something to grab it, but I only felt the rough edges of old wooden beams. The footsteps overhead had stopped the moment I opened the hatch. My scalp tingled, and my breathing felt shallow. I knew I was about to climb into a dark, cramped space with no flashlight, but I wanted answers. I climbed back down, walked into the nearest bedroom, and checked the small nightstand. I found a flashlight there, an older model that flickered once before turning on. Back at the hatch, I used the flashlight to illuminate the opening. The beam cut through layers of dust. I saw wooden boards across a narrow space, maybe an attic. I grabbed the edges of the opening and tried to pull myself up. My arms strained as I lifted myself enough to rest my stomach on the edge. The hatch was tight, and I scraped my elbow on a splinter. I let out a sharp hiss but kept going. Eventually, I got my upper body through, then twisted around until I could pull my legs inside. My first impression was that it was pitch black except for the beam from my flashlight. I shone it around and saw piles of old newspapers, some boxes stacked in the corners, and a few thick cobwebs hanging from the beams. The ceiling in the attic was slanted, following the roof's shape. I had to stoop to avoid hitting my head on the rafters. The floor felt rough under my feet. I took a few steps forward, shining the flashlight in every direction. The footprints I heard earlier were gone, and the place was silent except for my own breathing. My pulse was still racing. My hands shook a little, making the flashlight beam tremble. I inched further, stepping around boxes and loose boards. The attic wasn't large, but it was cluttered. I didn't see any sign of a person. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded hollow. No one responded. I stood there for a few seconds, considering the possibility that I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the noise was the wind or some structural movement. I was about to turn around and head back down when I caught sight of a narrow gap in the far corner of the attic. It looked like a small door or panel set into the wall. I walked over, carefully navigating over some broken boards. The panel was made of a different kind of wood than the rest of the walls. It had a latch, but no lock. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck. I lifted the latch, and the panel swung open. The opening led to a cramped storage area behind the attic wall. My flashlight illuminated a narrow space with no real flooring, just insulation and beams. There was a large trunk there, covered in a layer of dust so thick it looked gray. I stared at it, wondering why it was there. The footsteps that led me here had vanished. Still, my nerves were on edge, and the hair on my arm stood up. I carefully crossed a beam and knelt next to the trunk. The hinges were rusty but moved when I lifted the lid. I angled the flashlight inside and saw old clothes, some wooden carvings, and a stack of faded pictures. They smelled damp and stale. I lifted a piece of cloth. It felt rough. I moved it aside and found what looked like a journal with a cracked leather cover. I reached for it and flipped it open. The pages were yellowed, and the handwriting was hard to read in the dim light, but I could make out some dates from decades ago. My eyes scanned a few lines. They mentioned someone hearing noises in the chalet at night. There was also a mention of footsteps overhead, just like what I had heard. I felt a sudden urge to get out of there. My head was pounding with tension. I didn't like the cramped space or the stale air. I closed the trunk, left the panel open, and turned around. My plan was to climb back out of the attic and return to my room. Then I heard a creak behind me. It sounded like something shifting on a beam. My chest tightened and I froze. I swung the flashlight around. I saw nothing move, but the beam caught something reflective near the trunk. I stepped closer. I realized it was just a piece of broken glass leaning against the trunk's side. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I felt jumpy. My breathing came fast and my mouth felt dry again. I made my way back to the hatch, nearly stumbling once on a loose board. When I reached the hatch, I could see the hallway light shining up from below. It gave me relief. I knelt down, lowered my legs through the opening, and climbed down onto the chair. My feet touched the floor. I was back in the hallway. My face and arms were covered in dust, and my shirt stuck to my skin from sweat. I felt like I needed a shower, but I also wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything else up there. The footsteps had led me all the way to that hidden panel, but why had they stopped? I flipped the hallway light switch on and off, testing it, still uneasy. Then I closed the hatch, pushing it back into place until it clicked. I stood on my toes to see if it had any lock or latch from below, but it didn't. I grabbed the chair and set it aside. My body felt tense and my mind kept replaying the sound of those steps. The corridor felt quiet now, almost too quiet. I returned to the empty bedroom where I had first heard the footsteps above. The room looked dull and unremarkable under the overhead light. The bed frame sat there, the dresser, the window with a view of the dark mountains. Everything looked normal. I walked back down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. My knees felt a bit shaky. I think the fear and the adrenaline were wearing off. In the living room, I placed the flashlight on the table and sank into the old couch. The cushion sank under me, and I realized how exhausted I was. I didn't want to think about what could be walking around upstairs. I checked the time on my phone. It was almost 3 a.m, and there was still no signal. I glanced at the landline phone on the desk nearby. The caretaker's number was on a small card next to it. I considered calling, but it felt pointless to wake him up when I wasn't even sure what I had heard. Besides, I didn't want to sound like a frightened guest who was spooked by old house noises. I decided to stay on the couch for the rest of the night. I grabbed a blanket from my bedroom, pulled it over me, and tried to doze off. My thoughts kept returning to the footsteps. They had a deliberate rhythm, like someone pacing with a purpose. I also couldn't forget the dusty trunk and the journal mentioning footsteps. Somebody else had experienced this maybe years ago. There was no explanation in that short excerpt, just a note about hearing them. I wondered if that was the only mention or if there were more details deeper in the journal. But at that moment I was too drained to climb up there again. I lay there on the couch, my eyes darting around the room, scanning every shadow, waiting for another sound. The night passed slowly. The radiator hummed and I jumped at every small creak the chalet made. My heart raced whenever I thought I heard something move above me. Eventually, the first hints of dawn lightened the windows. I sat up, feeling stiff and unrested. The footsteps hadn't returned that night, but I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone in that place. That morning, I made some coffee, noticing my hands trembled a bit when I tried to pour water into the machine. I stood by the window, looking out at the mountains. My mind drifted to that attic again. The presence I felt seemed to want me to find something. Maybe it was that trunk, or maybe there was more hidden up there. I planned to check it again after I had some caffeine and a moment to steady my nerves. I was there to write, but now I felt stuck in a mystery that made my pulse pound. My next move was to return upstairs in daylight, armed with better lighting and a clearer head. I wanted to see if there was anything else in that attic space. Whatever it was, those footsteps didn't feel like a random house noise. They felt personal, like they were meant for me to follow. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face that, but I was certain I couldn't ignore it. Something in that chalet was calling me up step by step, and I had to find out why. I never expected to see my own face in an old portrait, but that's exactly what happened one Saturday at a local antique fair. I was walking through rows of dusty furniture, chipped tea sets, and worn-out books when I spotted it. The painting hung on a makeshift wooden wall under a flickering light. The vendor told me it had no real story attached, but the resemblance was obvious. The man in the picture looked like me, though his clothes belonged to a much older time. His hair was styled differently and his posture felt stiff, like he was posing for an official portrait. I couldn't turn away. I bought it on the spot and took it home. I didn't think it would change my life, but it did. When I got home, I placed the painting in the middle of my living room. I moved a couple of my usual decorations to fit it on the wall opposite my couch. I didn't notice anything weird right away. It was just an antique painting, a little faded with a dark wooden frame. The vendor had said it was at least a century old. I just found it interesting, especially because it looked so much like me. I had no explanation for that. Maybe it was a coincidence. I didn't question it for long. I was more interested in how it would look on the wall. That first night I turned off the lights around 11. My living room windows faced the street, and I had a street lamp right outside. Light came in through the gaps of my blinds. I kept glancing at the painting because I couldn't sleep. There was a faint sheen in the painted eyes. It looked like a slight reflection. At the time, I figured it was just the street lamp. I got up, walked closer, and checked. The eyes in the painting seemed to glimmer. I felt a short rush of tension in my gut, but I brushed it off. I assumed the varnish on the surface was reflecting light. A few nights passed without major incidents, but I developed a habit of looking at the painting before bed. Something about it made me uneasy. My palms felt clammy whenever I was close to it at night. The eyes had a strange depth. The painting showed this man wearing a dark jacket with a stiff collar. He had a neutral expression, neither happy nor sad. But sometimes when I blinked or when the room lights changed, I thought his mouth had shifted. On Wednesday night, I swore I saw his lips curve into a slight smirk. It was so subtle I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I turned on every light in the living room to double-check. The expression looked normal again. I tried to shrug it off as my mind messing with me. By Friday, I started feeling strange just walking past it in the morning. The painting had a stiff energy during the day, but it felt more intense at night. Around midnight, I lay on the couch struggling with insomnia. I heard the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. I caught myself staring at the painting's face. The eyes seemed to watch me. I rubbed my own eyes. Then I realized I was holding my breath. I tried to calm myself. I got up for a glass of water, hoping the motion would help me break that uneasy feeling. After I drank some water, I stepped back into the living room. I felt a chill. My hair stood up on my arms. I could have sworn the man in the painting winked at me. It was so fast I almost doubted it, but I felt my heart pound. My mouth went dry. A warm flush crept up my neck. I told myself it was an illusion caused by the flickering streetlight outside. I tried not to think about it, but I ended up lying awake for another hour, staring at the ceiling, feeling restless. Over the next few days, I developed a subtle dread about going into my own living room. On Monday, I tried to work from home. My desk is in the corner of that room, so I couldn't avoid seeing the painting. At around noon, sunlight was pouring in. The portrait's expression appeared normal. The background was a dark, brownish color. The face was pale, with fine brushstrokes for the cheekbones. The eyes were a dark greenish brown. The eyebrows had a slight arch. While typing on my laptop, I felt as if someone was watching me. I turned around and stared at the painting. It looked unchanged, but I felt a strange pressure in my chest. My breathing got shallow and I felt my fingers tremble. I told myself to ignore it. That evening, I tried to unwind with a few episodes of a comedy show. I turned on the TV, but I couldn't focus. My attention kept drifting to the painting. The corners of his mouth looked different again. It was a slight downturn now, almost like a frown. I paused the show, got up, and walked over. I leaned in close. The brush strokes around his lips weren't any different than I remembered. It seemed impossible for the expression to shift, yet it did. I felt my skin crawl. I decided to cover the painting with an old blanket. As soon as I did, I let out a long exhale. My shoulders relaxed a bit. I left it covered for 2 days. During that time, I slept better. I tried to forget about it. The house felt normal without seeing those eyes. But part of me kept thinking about it. On Thursday afternoon, curiosity got the best of me. I removed the blanket. It was broad daylight, so I felt safer. I stood there, studying the painting. It looked static again. The man's face was neutral. I even thought I might have exaggerated the entire thing in my head. So I decided to keep it uncovered just to prove I could handle it. That night, the tension returned. Around 10 p.m., I walked through the living room with the lights off. The painting's eyes caught a sliver of light coming from the kitchen. They looked glossy like real eyes in the dark. My heartbeat sped up. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that face staring at me. It felt intrusive. My heart wouldn't slow down. I got out of bed around midnight, deciding I'd just go watch some late-night TV until I got tired. I stepped into the living room and froze. My stomach clenched. The painting's face looked furious. His brows were angled in a sharp line. The lips were pressed together. That was completely different from the neutral look I saw earlier. I felt the blood rush to my head. My hands shook, and I grabbed the back of the couch for support. I considered throwing the painting out that night, but I thought about how much I spent on it. I also felt a strange pull. It was like I couldn't just get rid of it so easily. I decided to store it in a closet for a while. I took it down from the wall, walked carefully to the hallway closet, and leaned it against the back wall behind some coats. The closet was dark. I tried not to look at it as I closed the door. For the next 2 days, I didn't see the painting at all. I kept the closet door shut. I tried to focus on my usual routines. I even invited a friend over on Saturday. We ordered takeout, watched a movie, and I tried to act normal. But I felt this strange weight in my house. I knew the painting was just a few steps away. It felt like having a ticking clock in a box that you can't see, but you know it's there. My shoulders were tense the entire time, and I kept checking the hallway door. My friend asked if I was feeling okay. I lied and said I was fine. Late that night, I woke up around 3 a.m. sweating. I felt an urge to check the closet. I didn't want to, but it was like an itch I couldn't ignore. My mouth felt dry, and my pulse throbbed in my temples. I walked over in the dark. My legs felt stiff. I opened the closet door a crack. The hallway light was off, so I couldn't see much. I switched on the hallway light. I saw the edge of the frame behind the coats. Something made me pull the coats aside. The painting was there, facing me. A chill ran down my spine. My vision blurred for a second. The face looked hollow. His eyes had no sparkle. The mouth was open slightly as though he was about to speak. My heart hammered and I slammed the closet door shut. I didn't sleep much after that. I lay in bed, feeling my pulse racing. I stared at the ceiling until morning. My stomach hurt. I felt sweaty and cold at the same time. By Sunday afternoon, I decided I had to get rid of the painting. My plan was to take it to a storage facility or maybe even return it to the antique fair. But deep down, I worried no one would believe me. I wasn't even sure if I believed myself. All I knew was that I felt scared in my own home. I forced myself to open the closet again. My hands shook when I pulled the painting out. I tried not to look at the face, but I caught a glimpse. It looked neutral again, though there was a slight tilt to the eyebrows, like a suspicious look. I felt my breathing speed up. I stuffed the painting into a large plastic bag, careful not to damage the frame. I thought that maybe if I covered it up completely, I wouldn't have to see those eyes. I drove to a small storage facility on the outskirts of town. I paid for a month of a small unit. The place had old metal roll-up doors and a damp smell. I dragged the painting in, placed it against the back wall, and left without looking at it again. I locked the door, got in my car, and drove home. On the way back, I kept rubbing my sweaty palms on my jeans. My mouth felt dry. I turned on the radio for distraction, but every song felt irritating. I just wanted to be home and away from that thing. For a week, I managed to sleep better. I thought about the painting a lot, but I didn't see it anymore. I tried to convince myself that everything had been in my head. Maybe the strange changes in expression were just the result of lighting and my own imagination. I hoped the tension would fade. On the 8th day without the painting, I came home from work and noticed a strange smell in my living room. It wasn't strong, but it was like old varnish mixed with something dusty. I thought it might be mold or something in the walls. I checked around, sniffing near windowsills and corners. Then I saw a slight smudge on the wall where the painting used to hang. It looked like a faint outline of the frame. I felt uneasy, like a wave of anxiety rising in my chest. I told myself it was just some dust outline. I wiped it with a damp cloth. That night I heard a soft tap somewhere in the house. It sounded like a gentle knock. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then it repeated, a dull, rhythmic tap that seemed to come from the walls. I turned on the lights and followed the noise. It led me to the living room. I stood in the dark for a few moments, trying to pinpoint the sound. My heartbeat sped up. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. Then it stopped. The silence felt heavier than before. I tried to ignore it and went back to bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again with my heart pounding. I thought I heard that same knock. My entire body tensed. My ears felt hot, and my chest was tight. I got up, turned on the hallway light, and walked to the living room. My hands shook, but I had to check. I heard nothing. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the painting was somehow still here. I felt my throat tighten. I paced around, checking behind furniture. I knew it made no sense, but I felt compelled to look. The next day, I drove to the storage facility to see if the painting was still there. My heart raced as I lifted the metal door of my unit. The plastic bag was still in the corner. I loosened the bag's top and peered inside. The painting was there. I felt a strange relief, but it was mixed with dread. The man's face looked blank, like I remembered. But I felt that same pressure in my skull, like a tension headache creeping in. I resealed the bag and left, telling myself I just had to forget about it. That night, I heard the tapping again. It was fainter, but it wouldn't stop. I got out of bed and stomped around the living room, flicking the lights on. I cursed under my breath. I felt so frustrated. I yanked open the front door to see if something outside was causing the noise, but there was nothing. No wind, no branches hitting the walls, nothing. I went back inside. My chest felt tight. My arms tingled. I couldn't relax. At this point, I'm trying to figure out how to handle it. I know the painting is in storage, locked away, but the feeling hasn't left my house. Sometimes I feel a presence in the living room. The hair on the back of my neck stands up. I haven't slept well in weeks. My appetite is off. I keep checking the living room wall, expecting to see a faint outline of that face staring at me. I don't believe in curses or haunted objects. I've never liked ghost stories, but I'm out of logical explanations. I can't deny the changes I saw in that painting. I know it sounds ridiculous. I understand that most people wouldn't believe me, but I experienced every moment. I saw those eyes move. I saw the expression shift. And now, even though the painting isn't here, I feel like something lingered. I might take it somewhere far away, maybe to another town, and leave it there. But I worry that won't solve anything. Right now, I'm sitting in my living room, writing this down on my laptop. It's getting late. The street lamp outside is flickering. I keep glancing at the spot where the painting used to hang, half expecting to see it again. My body is tense. My breathing is shallow. I hear every little house noise. My eyes burn from lack of sleep. I'm hoping that by putting all these details out in a straightforward way, I can get a sense of control. My plan is to get up early tomorrow, drive to the storage unit, and figure out the final step. I don't want to bring it back to my home. I don't want anyone else to deal with it either. But I can't keep living like this. I'm scared that if I don't deal with it, this feeling will never leave me. I have no intention of harming myself or anyone else, but I need closure. I need to free my mind from this grip. I wish I could say it was all in my imagination, but I can't unsee what I saw. I can't forget the way those eyes glowed in the dark. I can't ignore the tapping and the tension that never really goes away. That painting changed my home. It changed my sleep. It changed my sense of what's real. Right now, I'm just hoping that locking it away for good, far from here, will help me move on. Because I can't handle another night with that face looking back at me. And I can't handle another day feeling like it's always right behind me, waiting to show itself. That's why I'm telling this story, to remind myself that I'm still in control, or at least, I'm trying to be. I realized something was off the moment I woke up in that dark hotel room and felt eyes on me from the corner. My chest felt tight, and I could hear my own breathing. I blinked a few times, trying to focus on whatever might be there. I saw the chair against the wall, the old upholstered chair, the one I remembered seeing when I first walked in. I couldn't see anyone, yet the hairs on my arms stood up. I stayed still for a few seconds and wondered if I was imagining things. My throat felt dry. I reached over to the small lamp on the bedside table, turned it on and looked at the chair again. Empty. Just a piece of furniture. But it was turned in my direction, at an angle I didn't recall leaving it. That small detail made my heart thump faster. I sat up fully and rubbed my face. I told myself I was tired, that maybe I had moved it without remembering. I pulled the blanket off, got up, and walked over to the chair. The floor creaked with every step. I touched the back of the chair, tried to move it back to the position I thought it was in before. I stood there feeling silly, but at least I knew for sure no one was there. I looked around the room one more time. There was nothing else out of place. I flicked the light off again and climbed back into bed, telling myself to calm down. This whole trip had been a last-minute thing. My boss asked me to attend a conference in a small town a few hours away. I searched online for a place to stay. The city had some modern hotels, but they were all booked or too expensive. Then I found this older place, an old-fashioned hotel with a big wooden door and a lobby that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. I arrived earlier that day and checked in at the front desk. The man who gave me my key was polite but a bit distant. He handed me a physical key attached to a small wooden tag. I remember walking through the hallway, noticing the old wallpaper, the creaking floorboards, and the dim lighting. It smelled faintly of furniture polish and stale air. My room was near the end of the corridor. The door squeaked when I opened it, and the overhead light was weak, so the room seemed shadowy even with the lights on. I remember glancing at the chair in the corner when I first entered. It looked worn and a bit faded. The bed was a simple queen size with a wooden headboard. There was a small desk by the window and an old wardrobe on the opposite wall. I didn't sense anything strange at first. I took a quick shower, changed into casual clothes, and went out for dinner. When I came back to the hotel, I felt an odd chill in the hallway. I remember checking my phone to see if the air conditioner was running, but the hallway didn't have any visible vents. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just cold outside, and the building didn't have proper insulation. I passed a few other guests in the hall. They nodded. I nodded back, but nobody seemed eager to chat. I went into my room, locked the door, and got ready for bed. I turned off the lights around 11, as far as I remember. I drifted off to sleep without any problem. That was until I woke up with that strange feeling that someone was watching me. My pulse was still racing as I tried to settle back into bed after checking the chair. I felt the sheets against my legs. They were cold. The pillow under my head felt damp with sweat, or maybe from the humidity in the room. I kept my eyes closed and tried to force myself to relax. Eventually, I dozed off again, but it didn't last. My bladder was bothering me, so I got up around maybe 2 or 3 in the morning to use the bathroom. My eyes were heavy, and I had that momentary confusion about where I was. I flipped the bathroom light on, used the toilet, then washed my hands. While drying them with the small towel, I heard something from the bedroom. At first I thought it might be a distant sound from outside. Sometimes old buildings carry noise from the street or from neighboring rooms. But it didn't really sound like normal hotel noise. It was more like a soft shuffle than silence. I stepped out of the bathroom, crossing the threshold back into the bedroom area. The light from the bathroom illuminated part of the bed and the side table. I saw something wet on the headboard, dark patches that reflected the faint light. At first I thought maybe I had spilled water earlier, but I hadn't used any water near the bed. I walked closer, and I noticed these marks looked like handprints, or at least something shaped like damp impressions. The wood finish was shiny where the moisture touched it, and there was no other water anywhere else. My stomach tightened, and I felt my knees go weak. I reached out and touched one of the marks with the tip of my finger. It was cold. I dried my finger on my shorts and tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe a leak from the ceiling? But the ceiling was completely dry. Maybe I had put my own hands there after washing them, but I didn't remember doing that, and the shape looked like 2 distinct prints on each side of the headboard. I stood there for a few seconds, then grabbed a tissue from the desk and tried to wipe it off. The moisture came away easily, leaving no real stain, but my chest felt tight. I looked around, trying to see if there was any other spot of moisture. The walls looked dry. The sheets looked dry. The chair was still in the corner, facing the bed. I noticed it was angled a little differently now, as if it had turned even more toward me. I stared at it for a moment, trying to decide if it had really moved or if my eyes were playing tricks. I gritted my teeth and stepped over to it. I placed my hands on the armrests and turned it back to face the wall, away from the bed. I even slid it a bit so it was flush with the corner. Then I walked back to the bed, climbed under the covers, and pulled them up to my chest. I left the bathroom light on this time. I tried to lie still, but my breathing kept coming in quick bursts. My heart pounded hard, and I could feel sweat forming on my temples. Then I heard it. A voice. A soft humming, right near my ear. It wasn't a tune I recognized. I couldn't make out the words if there were any. It was just a gentle sound, almost pleasant, but I knew it shouldn't be there. My throat went dry and my hands started shaking. I turned my head to the side, expecting to see someone crouched by my bed. There was nobody. My eyes darted around the room, from the nightstand to the window, back to the chair in the corner. It was still in place. I propped myself up on my elbows, scanning the room. The humming faded, or maybe it stopped the moment I sat up. All I could hear was my own pulse thudding in my head. I swallowed a few times, trying to calm down. I leaned over, grabbed the room phone, and dialed the front desk. No one picked up, which didn't surprise me given the time. I put the phone down and tried to slow my breathing. I told myself it might have been some leftover dream fragment, something in my half-awake mind. But it felt too real. I grabbed my cell phone from the nightstand and checked the time. It was 3:12 in the morning. My signal was weak, but I considered calling a friend or coworker just to hear a familiar voice. Then I realized I would sound ridiculous. I put the phone back down. I decided to get some water, hoping it would help me relax. I didn't want to walk to the lobby to find a vending machine, so I turned on the small coffee maker that was on top of the desk. I filled the pot with water from the bathroom sink, poured it into the machine, and switched it on. I stood there waiting for the water to heat up. That gave me a moment to gather my thoughts. The hum of the little machine was comforting in a weird way. It was a normal sound, a mechanical hum, not the gentle humming I'd heard near my ear. Once it finished, I poured myself a cup of plain hot water and sipped it, standing in my boxers and t-shirt, the bathroom light still on behind me. I stared at the bed, then at the chair in the corner, half expecting it to swivel around on its own. After I finished drinking, I turned off the coffee maker and flicked the bathroom light off. The room went dark again, except for a weak glow from the streetlight outside. I climbed back into bed and stared at the ceiling. The old pipes in the walls made occasional popping sounds. The wooden beams creaked, but I didn't hear any more humming. I tried to keep my eyes open just so I could see if anything else moved, but I was tired. Eventually, my eyelids got heavier and I drifted off. I woke up again when I felt something brush against my arm. It felt like a slight pressure. Then it was gone. I jerked upright. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat there, breathing fast, scanning the room. Nothing. The door was still closed, the curtains were drawn, the chair was in the corner. I reached over to the lamp and switched it on, bathing the room in a dull yellow light. I looked at my arm. There was no mark. The sheets were undisturbed. I checked the alarm clock on the nightstand. It was a little after 5 in the morning. I decided I was done trying to sleep. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, slipped on my shoes, and decided I might as well shower and get dressed. I turned on the shower, letting the water run hot. The mirror fogged up and I stepped under the spray, letting it hit my face and chest. I was half expecting to hear that humming again, but all I heard was the rush of water. My shoulders slowly relaxed. I thought maybe I could get through the rest of the morning without anything else strange happening. After I dried off and got dressed, I looked around the room. The wet handprints were gone, the sheets were just a bit rumpled, and the chair stayed in its corner. I started packing my bag. My conference wasn't supposed to start until 9, but I wanted to get out of that hotel as soon as possible. I felt uncomfortable. I shoved my clothes in my suitcase, zipped it up, and walked to the door. Then I paused. Part of me was worried that if I walked out, I might see something behind me in the mirror or catch a glimpse of movement, but I just opened the door. The hallway was quiet. I walked to the lobby, pulling my suitcase behind me. The wheels clicked over the uneven floor. When I got to the front desk, nobody was there. I rang the small bell and waited. Eventually, an older woman appeared from a back office. She asked me if I was checking out. I said yes, and I handed her the key. She asked if everything was okay. I said it was fine. I figured there was no point in telling her about the chair, the wet handprints, or the humming. I just wanted to leave. She typed into the computer for a moment and gave me the bill. I glanced at it and paid with my credit card. Then she handed me a receipt and told me to have a good day. I nodded and left. Outside, the sun was barely up and the air felt cool on my face. I walked to my car, tossed my suitcase in the trunk, and got in. The inside of the car smelled familiar. I gripped the steering wheel, exhaled, and realized my hands were still shaking a bit. I tried to breathe slowly. Then I started the engine and pulled away from that old hotel. I watched it shrink in my rearview mirror, an old structure with a fading sign. I thought about the weird experiences I'd had during the night, and I wondered if I was just exhausted, if maybe I'd had some vivid nightmares. But I remembered the chair, those wet prints, and that voice. I felt a slight shiver run down my back. I turned on the radio for distraction. The music filled the car, and I focused on the road ahead. I arrived at the conference center earlier than expected. I parked and sat in my car for a few minutes, my mind going back to that hotel room. I wanted to push it out of my head and focus on the day ahead. I kept replaying each moment, the feeling of being watched, the bathroom break, the wet handprints, the humming near my ear, that slight brush on my arm. I wasn't sure how to explain it. I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked into the building. I decided I wouldn't tell anyone about it. It was too strange, and I figured they'd just laugh or think I was stressed out from work. I signed in at the registration desk, found a seat, and tried to let the usual conference routines distract me. People around me made small talk, sipped coffee, and looked at their phones. I nodded hello to a few colleagues. My boss arrived and asked if I was okay. I said I was just tired. He shrugged and told me to get some rest later. The day went by slowly. I attended panels and took notes, but my thoughts drifted. I kept thinking about that soft humming. Occasionally, I felt an itch on my arm, like something brushing against it again, and I had to glance down to check. Nothing was ever there. By the time the conference ended that afternoon, I packed up my materials and drove straight home. I didn't stop for lunch or anything else. On the ride back, I kept replaying everything in my head. I still didn't have an explanation. I felt a strange tension in my shoulders and my eyes were tired. But I felt a little better once I was away from that old place. When I finally got home, I unlocked my front door, dragged my suitcase inside, and dropped it in the hallway. The quiet of my own house felt safe. I walked into my living room, sank onto the couch, and tried to calm my nerves. I haven't gone back to that hotel. I don't plan to. My boss asked me for feedback on the trip, and I just said the conference was fine and the hotel was old-fashioned. I have a feeling I won't ever book a room there again. Even now, sometimes late at night, I think about that voice humming. I can almost hear it if I let my mind wander. It wasn't threatening, it was just there in the darkness, making my skin crawl. I can't explain any of it, and I don't know if there's some reasonable excuse for those wet handprints. But I know what I felt, and I know it felt real. That's all I can say. I'm staying away from old hotels for a while. That night was enough for me. I still remember the wet smell of the park that afternoon. It was raining hard and I was out for my usual run. I was focused on my breathing, trying not to slip on the soaked pavement. I saw someone standing near a bench. I couldn't see the person's face. It looked like they were covered by a dripping piece of cloth. The moment I slowed down, that shape vanished, but the cloth stayed there, hovering in midair. My chest tightened, and I blinked to make sure I wasn't losing it. Then I felt a blast of cold air across my neck. There was no wind. I turned around, my shoes sloshing in puddles, and the cloth dropped onto the bench and slid to the ground. I walked over, crouched, and picked it up. It was warm and dry, like it had just come out of a dryer. My hand started shaking, and I set it down. I looked around to see if anyone else was there, but I was alone. When I turned back, the cloth was gone. From that day on, each time it rains, I sense it around me, like it's watching me between the trees. I want to explain how it all started in detail, because it didn't stop with that first encounter. I was just an ordinary guy running in the rain. I run in the park a lot, no matter the weather. I like how quiet it is when it's raining. Most people stay away. That day it was mid-afternoon. The sky was dull and everything looked gray. My shoes squeaked and rainwater slipped off my cap. I had earbuds in my ears, but I wasn't playing music. I just wore them to block out some of the noise. I remember hearing the rain hitting the leaves on the trees. I remember the faint splashing sound every time I took a step. Then I noticed that figure near the bench. The bench was about 20 feet away from the path where I usually run. The figure seemed short, but it was hard to tell because it was hunched over. It was covered by something thin. The water was running off it like there was a small waterfall around the shoulders. I felt a tingling in the back of my neck. I thought maybe someone was hurt or waiting for help. I slowed down and pulled my earbuds out. The figure didn't move. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" I didn't get a response. The rain started to come down heavier, so I stepped off the path and onto the grass. My feet sank into the muddy ground. I moved closer and I tried not to slip. My shirt was clinging to my chest and my breath was short. Something felt off. I heard water splashing against the bench and I heard my own breathing. That was it. No wind, no rustling branches. Then I looked up and the figure was gone. It didn't run away. It just wasn't there anymore. But the cloth was still hovering. It floated at about waist height. I wiped my face to clear the rain from my eyes. The cloth moved side to side and I felt a sudden chill blast across my shoulders. My skin tightened and I let out a gasp. I looked around to see if there was a gust of wind shaking the trees, but there was nothing. It was like a pocket of cold air washed over me for a second. Then the cloth dropped onto the bench and slid to the muddy ground. I took a step back, feeling my stomach twist. I couldn't figure out what I was looking at. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to decide if I should touch it. I reached down, picked it up with 2 fingers, and realized it was completely dry. It was also warm. I held it in my hands and felt heat, like it was alive. I moved my thumbs across the surface. It was smooth, a bit thinner than a typical scarf or towel. My heart was racing. I was soaking wet, yet this piece of cloth was dry. Then I turned my head for a moment to check if anyone was around. There wasn't a soul in sight. When I looked back at my hands, the cloth was gone. I'm not sure if I dropped it or if it vanished. I just know my hands were empty. The rain on my skin felt freezing after that warmth. I ran home that day faster than usual. My clothes were soaked and my legs were shaking when I got to my apartment. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cloth and felt the heat in my hands. I tried to tell myself it was some trick of the light, or maybe I was just exhausted, but I couldn't forget that cold blast of air or how it felt when I touched that material. The next day, I almost skipped my run because I was on edge, but I forced myself to go. The weather was decent, so I thought everything would be back to normal. I ran the usual route. The sky was clear. I spotted the same bench from a distance. I slowed down, approached it, and found nothing strange. No cloth, no figure, no sign that anything had been there the day before. My shoulders relaxed and I felt my face warm up. I guess I was a little embarrassed for spooking myself. But as the days passed, I noticed a pattern. Every time it rained, I felt uneasy, like someone was standing behind me watching me. I started looking over my shoulder a lot. Sometimes I saw a hint of white between the trees. Sometimes I saw movement near a lamppost. I tried to get closer, but the shape always disappeared. The next clear sighting happened about 2 weeks later. It was another rainy afternoon. I was running with a hooded jacket this time. I had left my cap at home. The wind was picking up, so I was more aware of the weather. I felt the rain on my face and I heard branches creaking a bit. I also heard the thud of my footsteps against the pavement. After about 10 minutes, I passed by a row of tall bushes. My gut tightened. I saw that cloth shape behind the bushes. It seemed to float about a foot off the ground. I stopped and stared. My breathing got heavier. I felt my pulse in my wrists. I inched closer, stepping on wet leaves. I heard squishing sounds as I moved. The shape vanished before I got around the bushes. I whispered something like, "What the hell?" I realized I was alone, talking to myself. The bushes shook a bit, but the wind wasn't strong enough to do that. My hands started to sweat even though it was cold. I waited a few seconds, but I didn't see anything else. Then I turned back toward the main path and finished my run in a hurry. At home, I dried off, ate dinner, and tried to focus on other things, but my mind kept coming back to that hovering shape. I started changing my schedule. Sometimes I ran in the morning, sometimes late at night, but I couldn't avoid the rain forever. My city gets a decent amount of rain, especially in certain months. The sightings became more frequent. Sometimes I would see it under a tree, sometimes near a different bench. It always looked the same, a piece of cloth draped in the air, watching me. It never came closer than about 15 or 20 feet. I could feel a tug in my chest each time, like my instincts were screaming at me to leave. One time, I decided to confront it. It was early evening and the sky was full of dark clouds. I had my phone in my pocket. The rain started to come down in large droplets. I ran straight to the spot where I had first seen it. There was nothing there at first. I jogged around, scanning every tree and every bench. After 20 minutes, I was soaked. My shoes made slapping sounds with each step. My thighs felt cold. My jacket was dripping at the sleeves. Then I spotted it near the park's small pond. It was floating above a metal bench that faced the water. I moved closer, trying not to think too hard. My heart was pounding, and my mouth felt dry. I got within 10 feet of it. I could see the cloth shifting slightly, like it was being lifted by invisible hands. It wasn't touching the bench, it was hanging in the air. I raised my phone to take a photo, but when I tapped the screen, it was gone. I couldn't see it anymore. My phone captured nothing but the bench and the pond. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I looked around, but I didn't see anyone. The rain dripped off my hood and ran down my face. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off that bench. Then I jogged out of there, my lungs burning. That night, I laid awake, feeling numb. I kept picturing myself standing so close to that thing. I replayed the moment I tried to take a picture. I couldn't figure out why it disappeared so fast. I wanted answers, but I didn't know who to ask. I considered talking to a friend about it, but I didn't want them to think I was imagining things. I tried to forget about it for a few days, but the rain came back again. So did the sightings. Sometimes I'd just catch a glimpse of a white shape through the trees. Other times I'd see it near a distant path. A few times I heard a faint sound, like air escaping through a small gap. It reminded me of a quiet hiss. I don't know if it came from the cloth or something else around me. My reaction stayed the same. Tight chest, sweaty hands, and that urge to run away or do something stupid like grab it again. There was one day when I felt especially bold. I don't know why. I guess I was tired of being jumpy all the time. It was a Sunday, around midday, and the rain was steady. I went out to the park with a flashlight in my pocket. It wasn't dark, but I felt safer having something to hold. I walked instead of ran. I checked behind every tree. I circled around the pond. I passed all the benches. After a while, I saw a shimmer behind a row of tall bushes. My heart started racing. I walked closer. The cloth was there, drifting at eye level. The rain tapped on leaves around me. I stepped forward, shining the flashlight on it. Even though there was enough daylight to see, the cloth was motionless, as if someone was holding it from above. I gripped the flashlight tight. My jaw felt stiff. The cloth shifted forward a few inches, and I heard a soft brushing sound, like it was scraping against the air. I wanted to speak, but my throat was tight. I managed to say, "Who are you?" I didn't get an answer. I thought maybe I'd try to grab it again. I was angry and scared, and my chest felt heavy. I took 2 quick steps and reached out. My fingertips brushed the edge of the cloth, and I felt warmth again. It was comforting in a strange way, but it made my breath catch in my throat. Before I could wrap my hand around it, I felt that rush of cold air blast across my face. I stumbled back, losing my footing on the wet grass. I fell on my side, hitting the ground hard. When I lifted my eyes, the cloth was gone. I slammed my palm on the grass in frustration. After that, I stopped going to the park for about a week. I needed a break from the anxiety. I tried running on a treadmill at a local gym, but it wasn't the same. I felt trapped indoors. Eventually, I missed the fresh air, even if it was a bit creepy on rainy days. When I returned, the sky was cloudy but not raining. I decided to do a short run, just to see if my nerves could handle it. I didn't see the cloth, so I started to relax again. A few days later, it rained. As soon as the first drops hit my window, my stomach tightened. I knew that if I went to the park, I'd sense it again. I still go running in the rain. I don't always see it, but I feel it. Sometimes I'll be at one end of the park, and I'll catch a glimpse of something near the other side between the trees. I feel like it's following me without ever coming too close. I don't know what it wants or why it shows up. I don't see a face or a body. It's just that cloth, hanging in midair or moving around quietly. Whenever it vanishes, I check the ground, hoping to find some clue. I never do. I've tried to ignore it, but it's hard. Each time I see that cloth, my hands get clammy and my legs feel unsteady. My heart beats so fast it almost hurts. There's no dramatic event, and I don't see anything else bizarre in the park. Just that cloth, warm to the touch if I ever get close. It doesn't speak, it doesn't leave footprints, and it doesn't seem to hurt me. But it scares me because it shouldn't exist. It's a reminder that something is off in that park during the rain. I've thought about taking pictures or recording video. I've tried a few times, but my camera never captures it clearly. Either the image turns out blurry or the cloth doesn't appear at all. I even tried a live stream, but the signal got messed up. It's like the cloth can't be recorded. I've shown people blank videos trying to explain that something was there. Nobody believes me, and I can't blame them. If I hadn't felt it myself, I'd think it was a stupid story. These days, I still run in that park. I like running in the rain, even if it unsettles me. My heart thumps harder whenever the rain clouds roll in, and I keep my eyes peeled for any movement. Sometimes I see the cloth near a path lamp or behind a trash can, just hovering. Sometimes I feel that sudden cold air, and the hair on my arm stands up. Then, when I turn around, it's gone. I never find the cloth lying on the ground anymore. It only appeared that one time when I first touched it. I wish I had kept it, but it vanished from my hands. I don't have a resolution for this. I don't have a plan. Every time it rains, I run and hope I won't see it. But I almost always do. It lingers in the distance or it shifts behind a tree. I can't say why it's watching me. I can't say what it wants. All I know is that it's real, because I've touched it. I've felt its warmth, and I've felt that icy gust afterward. That's all I can say. It's there, and it won't leave me alone. Even now, as I talk about it, I feel a tightness in my chest. I can't get rid of the memory. Sometimes I lie awake at night, thinking about the next time it rains. I try to picture the park and that cloth moving between the benches. It doesn't help me relax, but I can't stay cooped up in my apartment forever. So I keep running there, rain or not. Part of me wants to see it again just to prove it's not in my head. Another part of me hopes it's gone for good. But it never goes away. It's always waiting, warm and dry in the middle of a rainstorm, staring at me from a distance I can't close. I can only keep my eyes open and hope it never decides to come any closer. I'll never forget the first time I heard the scratching. It was late at night and I was in bed half asleep when this faint rasping sound broke through the silence. It wasn't loud, but it felt steady. My eyes snapped open and my heart started pounding in my chest. I got out of bed, walked down the hallway, climbed the stairs to the attic, and stood in front of that old door I'd never been able to open. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard that dragging sound like a fingernail or something sharp scraping across the other side. My hands were sweating. I felt this urge to back away, but my curiosity kept me there. I knocked, got no response, but the scratching stopped. I live in a house that I inherited from my grandmother. It's a small place, but it has this attic that's bigger than you'd expect. There's only one entrance to the attic, a narrow staircase near the end of the hallway on the second floor. The attic itself is divided into two sections. One part is open, with old boxes and dusty furniture. The other part is sealed off by this door with no visible lock or handle. The wood looks worn, and there's a metal plate where a knob should be, but there's no keyhole, no latch, nothing. Over the years, I've tried every approach I could think of. I've pushed on the door, kicked it, tried prying at the edges with a crowbar, but it never moves. It doesn't even creak. It just feels solid, like a barrier that refuses to budge. That first night of scratching turned into the longest hour I've ever spent. I stood there with my ear against the door, listening to that slow, steady scrape. My forehead was damp and my arms felt tense. My breathing got shallow. I tried to talk, asking if someone was in there. The scratching paused, then started again. It made me sweat even more because I realized it was responding to me. I didn't have any logical explanation. I've never seen any hidden passage or trick in this house. I even looked through old papers in the basement to see if there was a mention of a sealed room. There was nothing. I hurried back downstairs, grabbed a hammer, and rushed up to the attic again. I pounded on the door for a while. The noise bounced around me, making my ears ring. I thought maybe it would break the wood, but the door stayed solid. I didn't see any damage to it afterward. It still looked the same, faded and old, but as sturdy as concrete. I got so frustrated that I started kicking it. I kicked it until I felt a sharp pain in my foot. I was limping afterward, but the door didn't show a single crack. After exhausting myself, I went back to bed. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with thoughts. I tried to calm down by telling myself it could be a rat or something caught behind there, but I'd never heard a rat sound like that. I felt uneasy, but I managed to shut my eyes for a few hours. The next day, I walked around the house, hoping to see if there was another entrance or some hidden structural feature I'd missed. I checked the outside walls and the roof. I didn't see any window or boarded-up opening that might lead to that closed-off area. Everything looked normal. There were no unusual gaps, no hidden vents. I even used a flashlight to examine cracks in the attic walls, but it was pointless. I started to feel a knot in my stomach. I told myself there had to be a normal explanation, but my instincts kept telling me there was something else going on. That evening, I heard voices for the first time. I was in the living room when I heard a muffled sound from upstairs. I froze. My arms felt cold. My stomach churned. I stood up and walked to the staircase. I heard my name being called. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to make me stop in my tracks. I felt this dread spreading from my chest to my throat. My heart was racing so fast that I could feel each beat. I forced myself to climb the stairs, holding the railing tight so I wouldn't stumble. When I reached the attic door, the voices seemed to quiet down. I put my ear against the wood again. For a few seconds, all I heard was my own breathing. Then I heard my name, whispered in a pleading tone. It sounded like someone was on the other side, pressed up against the door. I didn't know what to do. My palms were sweating, and my knees felt weak. I knocked softly and asked who was there. There was a long pause. Then the whisper came again, asking me to open the door. I tried pushing on the wood, but it was locked as usual. I yelled that I couldn't unlock it. The whisper kept repeating my name, sounding desperate. I ran downstairs and grabbed a flashlight and a small camera. I wanted to record the sounds in case I was imagining them. When I got back to the attic, the voice was still there. I pressed record on the camera, but the playback later didn't capture much. I could make out some faint static, but not the voice. This made me feel uneasy. My body was on edge, like every muscle was bracing for something to jump out. Over the next few days, the voice got louder. It would call out to me at random times, sometimes during the afternoon, sometimes in the middle of the night. Whenever I went up to the attic, I felt a cold draft coming through the door. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I started keeping a small space heater in the attic to see if it would change the temperature. It didn't. The door area stayed cold, no matter what. One evening, I put my ear against the wood and noticed a faint breeze passing through. It felt icy against my skin. I thought maybe there was a crack or gap. I ran my hand along the edges, but I couldn't find any open space where air could pass. It just felt like solid wood. On the fifth day, the voice sounded more urgent. It asked me to help, saying it was trapped. I asked if it was a person. It didn't answer with anything detailed. It just kept asking me to open the door. I asked how. I said there was no knob or lock. I kept pressing the door and I felt this slight vibration, as if something was pushing back from the other side. I put all my weight against it. I felt my muscles straining, but it was no use. I didn't feel any closer to getting in. After a while, I started feeling restless. I didn't like being alone in the house. I kept the lights on and turned the TV up loud. But every now and then I'd hear footsteps overhead right above me in the attic. I'd rush upstairs, stand in front of the door, and listen. Sometimes I'd hear scraping. Other times, I'd just hear silence. My nerves were shot. I was thinking of moving out, but the thought of leaving this unresolved made me uneasy. It was my house after all, and I felt responsible. I worried that something was locked in there, something that didn't belong in a normal room. I tried a professional locksmith even though there was no lock. He came over and examined the door. He tapped on different spots, used some tools, tried to slide thin metal edges around the frame. After a while, he shrugged and said he couldn't do anything. There was no mechanism to pick or remove. He said the door was sealed shut in a way he'd never seen. He suggested I call a contractor and have them break down the wall around the door. That idea lingered in my mind, but it also made me feel uneasy, like I was about to unleash something I wouldn't understand. The next night, the voice sounded angry. It repeated my name in a tone that made my neck tense up. I felt pressure in my head, almost like a headache building up. I told it to stop. I actually said, "Leave me alone," out loud. But it didn't stop. It kept saying my name until I shouted back. My voice echoed in the attic. Then it went quiet. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the door. My hands were shaking, my heart was hammering. The door remained still. By the 8th night, I started hearing knocking from the other side. It was slow, like a single tap repeated every few seconds. My body reacted with fear, but I also felt frustrated. I shouted that I couldn't open it. Then the knocking got faster. I slammed my fist against the door, but it felt useless. Eventually, the knocking stopped. I just stood there staring at the door, my breath coming in short bursts. I decided I had to do something drastic. I went to the garage and grabbed a sledgehammer. My plan was to smash through the wall next to the door. I came back to the attic, stood at the edge of the door frame and swung the hammer at the drywall. The sound was loud. Bits of plaster and dust flew everywhere. I covered my mouth with my sleeve and kept hitting the wall. After 5 swings, I had a hole in the wall big enough to see inside. I aimed my flashlight into that space. I saw the wooden boards that made up the side of the sealed room. There was another layer of wood behind the drywall. It looked thick, almost like it was reinforced. I slammed the hammer against it, but it barely dented. I tried at different angles. My arms were burning, and my lungs felt tight from the dust. After 10 minutes, the hole was bigger, but there was still no opening into the sealed room. I dropped the hammer and stepped back, out of breath. I couldn't see anything through the partial gap, just old wooden boards. I left the hole there, hoping maybe I'd discover a weak spot. But the next morning, I found it unchanged. It was just a hole leading to another barrier. I felt a sense of defeat. That day, the voice was quiet. I didn't hear my name. I didn't hear knocking or scratching. I almost felt relieved, but I also felt paranoid, like something was waiting for the right moment. On the 10th night, I heard the door itself move. The sound was distinct, like wood scraping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and ran upstairs. I found the door cracked open a fraction of an inch. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I walked closer, feeling that cold draft get stronger. My hand was trembling, but I reached for the edge of the door. I pushed on it gently. It didn't open any further. I tried pulling on it, and it wouldn't budge. It was like it had moved on its own, just enough to form a thin gap. I peered into that gap with my flashlight. I didn't see anything inside except darkness. The air smelled stale. My eyes started watering, probably from dust. I tried using a screwdriver to pry it open, but the wood didn't give. Then I heard a faint whisper, right at my ear. I jerked back so hard that I nearly dropped the flashlight. The whisper repeated my name again, this time sounding weaker, like it was struggling to speak. I stepped away from the door, breathing hard, and waited to see if it would move again. It didn't. It stayed stuck at that slight opening. I spent the next few hours in the attic, pacing around, shining my flashlight on the door every now and then. The gap never got any bigger. Finally, I went downstairs, made some coffee, and tried to calm down. My mind was racing with thoughts about what could be behind that door. I didn't want to deal with it anymore, but I knew I had to. It was either that or leave my own house. Later that same night, I stood in front of the attic door again. My arms felt heavy. My feet were cold. I had the sledgehammer in my hand, but I couldn't find the nerve to start swinging again. The door was still cracked open. I leaned my ear toward it and heard breathing. It was faint, like someone was standing close on the other side. I backed up until I was at the top of the attic stairs. I just watched that gap, half expecting something to slip through it. By dawn, I was still there. Nothing came out, and it never opened further. I finally went to my bedroom and tried to sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. Every small sound in the house made me jump. My muscles were tense, and I couldn't get comfortable. I lay there, picturing that gap in the door, imagining it swinging open on its own. Now it's been a few days. The door remains exactly the same, slightly ajar. I still hear the occasional whisper, and the cold air still seeps out. Sometimes I see the door shift a bit, like it's trying to open wider. I sit there watching it, waiting to see if it'll open on its own. Part of me wants to run at it and bust it down. Another part of me wants to seal it shut with planks and never go near it again. I'm stuck in this uneasy balance. Every time I walk up to that door, I feel my heart pounding and my breathing get unsteady. I keep a flashlight and a crowbar nearby, just in case. I haven't slept well since the scratching started. My dreams are full of images of me stepping inside that hidden room and not being able to get out. I don't know what's behind there, and at this point I'm not sure I want to find out. But I also can't ignore it. Sometimes I stand at the attic door, telling it to open if it wants out so badly. It never does, not completely. It just stays stuck, mocking me with that small gap. There's this fear gnawing at me that one day I'll wake up and the door will be wide open, and I won't be able to handle what's inside. But there's another fear, that I'll never know and I'll live with this tension forever. I have no idea which outcome is worse. All I can do is wait and keep my eyes on that gap, hoping I'm ready if it finally opens. I felt something was off the moment I turned the corner onto my usual street that night. It looked the same at first glance. Familiar houses, the same sidewalk, the same uneven patches of concrete. But I noticed right away that it felt longer, like the blocks were stretched out. I didn't want to believe it, but every step made that uneasy feeling grow. My palms started sweating, and I hadn't even walked more than a few yards. I just knew something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the sense that I was entering a place I didn't quite recognize anymore. I usually walk home from the bus stop after work. It's a quiet neighborhood with simple one-story houses, small front yards, and a few streetlights that flicker every now and then. The sidewalk is narrow and some parts of the road have small cracks. On normal nights, I can see the end of the street after a few blocks. There's a corner store near the intersection with a bright sign, and that usually tells me I'm almost home. That night, I didn't see the sign. Instead, I saw a single streetlight about 2 blocks away, flickering a pale yellow light. It caught my attention because it felt like a signal. I couldn't figure out why, but my gut told me to focus on that light. I walked forward, keeping my eyes on the flickering lamp. As I got closer, the lamp kept blinking on and off. It made everything around it look like a stop-motion scene, bright one moment, dark the next. When I finally reached that pole, I realized I had gone farther than I normally would to get to that specific block. It didn't match my usual landmarks. My house should have been maybe another block away, but I still couldn't see it. Instead, I saw another streetlight in the distance, also flickering. I looked back over my shoulder, hoping to see the bus stop or something else that would ground me. The bus stop was way too far. It looked like I had walked half a mile, not just 2 blocks. I felt a jolt of nervous energy in my chest. My heart started racing. I heard my own breath coming out quick and shallow. The air felt colder than usual, and the pavement under my feet seemed slightly damp. I kept walking forward, reasoning that maybe I was just tired and not paying attention to where I was. The flickering lamp in the distance drew my eyes again. It was like the only beacon in the darkness, so I aimed for it, hoping I'd eventually see my block or a familiar house. Once I reached the second flickering lamp, I paused. I realized I was standing in front of a house I'd never noticed before. It had a run-down fence and a mailbox hanging crooked on a rusted hinge. The windows were dark. There was no car in the driveway. I couldn't hear any voices or TV sets inside. It was just empty. My stomach turned and I felt goosebumps along my arms. I checked my phone to see if I could call someone, but there was no signal. Usually I have at least 2 bars in this area. That night, the phone had nothing. No data, no service, nothing. I thought about turning around and trying a different street. But something in the back of my mind told me that turning around might not fix anything. I took a few steps forward and heard a strange scraping sound. It reminded me of metal dragging across pavement. I froze for a moment. The sound seemed distant, but it also felt like it was echoing through the empty street. I stared at the dark pavement, expecting to see some trash can knocked over or maybe an old shopping cart. Nothing was there. My eyes scanned the street ahead. It was silent except for that sporadic scraping noise. I glanced behind me, but all I saw were the empty houses and the flickering lampposts stretching back the way I had come. It was at that point that I realized I might be stuck in some kind of loop. I know it sounds ridiculous, but each time I reached a flickering streetlight, another one would pop up farther ahead, blinking on and off like a signal. The rest of the street was either too dark to make out, or just extended into some kind of void. My breathing got faster and my chest felt tight. I swallowed hard and started walking more quickly, telling myself that if I kept going, eventually I'd hit the main road or see my own block. My mouth was dry, and every time my shoes scuffed the sidewalk, I jumped a little. As I walked, I kept track of the houses on my left and right. They all looked similar, small, old, and dark. Some had peeling paint, others had broken fences. None of them showed signs of life. I saw no lights in the windows, no parked cars with interior lights on, no movement behind curtains. The only sounds were my footsteps and that weird scraping that came and went. Occasionally, I heard a faint rattle, like chains being pulled tight and then released. Each time I heard it, my stomach tensed. I kept telling myself to stay focused on what was in front of me. I reached another flickering lamppost. I stopped under it, taking a moment to catch my breath. My heart was pounding and my forehead felt damp. The light above me pulsed in a slow rhythm, on, off, on, off. I pulled my phone out of my pocket again, but it still had no signal. I tried turning it off and on. Nothing changed. That left me feeling more alone than ever. I thought about knocking on one of the house doors, but something about the silence around me made that idea feel risky. I didn't want to see what might open the door. I didn't want to discover some stranger lurking inside. So I stood there debating my next move. Should I go back or keep going forward? My gut told me not to look back anymore. It was like there was a warning in the air, an unspoken message that turning around would be a mistake. So I took a few more steps forward. The next flickering lamppost appeared again, about a block away, just like before. As I walked, the scraping sound of chains grew louder. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I scanned the road ahead, trying to see if anything was there, but I saw no shapes, no figures, nothing that could create a chain-dragging noise. Still, the sound persisted, sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always around. My pulse drummed in my ears. I felt sweat trickle down my back, and my legs started to feel weak. I kept swallowing because my mouth had gone completely dry. There was a moment when I thought I saw something move near a fence line. A shadow flickered across the ground in the corner of my vision. I stopped walking and turned my head, but all I saw was the side of a house. Nothing moved. The chain noise faded a bit. My heart thumped so hard I thought it might burst. My lungs felt tight and I breathed in short bursts. I told myself, keep it together. It's just your mind playing tricks. But I couldn't calm down. I passed 2 more blocks, each marked by a flickering light post. My body felt drained, like I'd been walking for hours. My legs ached, and my shoulders felt stiff. I kept glancing behind me, even though I felt I shouldn't. Each time the street looked empty, just a stretch of asphalt with those flickering lights receding into the distance. It was like looking into a distorted mirror of the street ahead. No matter which direction I looked, it felt endless. I decided to try something different. I turned left at the next intersection, hoping I could cut through a side street and reach a main road. But that street looked dark and uninviting. I saw a single lamppost flickering at the far end, just like the others. The houses on that block had the same look. Dark windows, closed doors, no signs of life. I walked down it anyway, desperate for a change of scene. The chain sounds echoed again, sharper and more frequent this time. It felt like it was following me, pacing me, waiting for me to slip up or stop moving. As I continued down that side street, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. For a split second, I got excited. Maybe I had a signal. Maybe someone was calling me. I fumbled to grab my phone. The screen showed a notification symbol, but it vanished in an instant. Then the phone went back to having no signal. It was like something was teasing me. I stared at the device for a few seconds before shoving it back into my pocket, cursing under my breath. I stepped onto a patch of sidewalk that was uneven. I lost my footing and stumbled, nearly crashing to the ground. My knee banged against the concrete and a jolt of pain shot up my leg. I winced and stayed down for a moment, supporting myself on my hands. My palms scraped against the rough surface. I could feel small bits of gravel digging into my skin. My eyes darted around, worried that something might come out of the darkness while I was vulnerable. But nothing happened. The chain sounds were still there, though, steady and quiet. I pushed myself back up, brushing off my pants. My knee hurt, but I could walk, so I forced myself to keep moving. After a few more minutes on that side street, I realized it was looping back to the main street somehow. At least, it looked that way. I saw the same flickering streetlight I had left behind earlier, or one just like it. I reached it, and my heart sank when I saw the same crooked mailbox on my right. It was like I'd never turned at all. My body started trembling. I could feel my pulse in my throat, and I felt an urge to run, but I resisted. I wasn't sure if running would help, or if it would just lead me deeper into this strange loop. I pushed forward, determined to find some kind of escape. My shoulders were tense and my lower back felt tight. My eyes darted to every house and every yard. I looked for any detail that might help me figure out if I was actually moving forward or just walking in circles. Everything looked the same. Cracked walls, drooping fences, dim porch lights that didn't actually illuminate anything. The flickering streetlights felt like a countdown in my head, each one passing by as I struggled to keep my grip on reality. The chain noises started to come in bursts, like something dragging across the pavement in short intervals. I felt my breathing pick up, and my legs twitched with adrenaline. I tried to pinpoint the direction of the sound, but it seemed to echo from every angle. The street around me was wide and empty. There were no cars parked along the curb, no trash cans, no people. I felt like I was on a stage with a spotlight flickering overhead, and something was watching from the darkness. At one point, I stopped and faced forward, ignoring the urge to look behind me. The scraping noise was growing louder, more aggressive. My heart pounded hard enough that my chest hurt. My back tingled with the idea that something might be standing just a few feet away. But I remembered the feeling I had earlier, the sense that I shouldn't look back. It was a powerful instinct, stronger than curiosity. So I stared at the pavement in front of me, took a deep breath, and forced myself to step forward. Another breath, another step. My muscles felt like they were made of stone, but I kept going. A few steps later, the chain sounds lessened. It was like whoever or whatever was making them decided to pause. My stomach churned with nausea. I worried that if I turned around, I'd see something standing there, holding a length of metal chains in its hands. My arms shook and my eyes stung with sweat. I realized I was silently pleading for daylight, for the sun to just rise and burn away these flickering lights, but it felt like the night was infinite. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The time hadn't changed much, which was bizarre because I felt like I'd been walking for over an hour. The clock showed maybe 10 minutes had passed since I first noticed the street felt longer. That realization hit me hard. My throat tightened and I exhaled shakily. It was like time and distance weren't in sync here. Eventually, I saw another intersection up ahead. It was the same setup. A dead, dark street crossing the one I was on, with a single flickering light at the corner. I approached it with my stomach in knots. My footsteps sounded hollow against the asphalt. The chain noise came back, faint but definite. I clenched my fists to stop my hands from shaking. I turned onto that street, hoping to break the cycle again. But as soon as I stepped onto it, I recognized the front of that run-down fence with the crooked mailbox. I realized I was in the exact same spot as before, just from a different angle. My legs felt weak and I nearly dropped to my knees. My lungs expanded and contracted in frantic bursts. The chain sounds stopped completely, leaving me in total silence except for the buzzing of the streetlight. I felt trapped. I wanted to scream, but I was afraid of what might respond if I did. The entire street ahead looked so dark that I couldn't see where it ended. I forced myself to keep moving, setting one foot in front of the other. My knee throbbed from the earlier fall, and my ankles felt sore. Each breath I took was labored, and my tongue felt heavy in my mouth. I tried to think of something logical, like maybe this was a trick of my mind or some sort of hallucination. But the cold air, the taste of my own sweat, the ache in my body, these things felt too real to be a dream. As I reached yet another flickering lamppost, I heard the faint rattle of the chains again. It was behind me, but I refused to look back. My breath caught in my throat, and I stared straight ahead. The sidewalks, the houses, the parked cars that should be there, none of them were in sight, except for the same old houses, the same fences, the same empty driveways. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, took a shaky breath, and opened them again. The street was still the same. No change, no escape. I took a step forward, and the chains scraped again. My body shuddered. I took another step, focusing on the sound of my shoes hitting the ground. Step by step, I tried to keep my mind clear. My vision blurred a bit with tears, but I wiped them away. I told myself I had to keep going. Maybe after one more block, I'd see my own front door. Maybe I'd see the corner store. Maybe I'd see another person. I didn't care who it was at this point. I just wanted human contact. With each block, I repeated the same routine. Approach the flickering lamp, notice another one in the distance, hear the chain noise behind me. My body shook and my breath came out in gasps. I wanted to run, but I was too scared I'd fall again. I could feel my clothes clinging to my skin, drenched in sweat. The air felt thick, making it hard to breathe. I kept thinking about how I just wanted to see something familiar, or hear a car engine or a dog barking. Anything that would break this awful loop. But there was nothing. Every house was silent. Every lamppost blinked like it was short-circuiting. Every block stretched on, leading nowhere. And that chain sound never vanished completely. It stayed behind me, taunting me, reminding me that I wasn't alone, but also that I was utterly isolated. I don't know how long I walked. Maybe my phone's clock was broken, or time wasn't moving right. My legs started to numb, my feet ached, and my shoulders burned from tension. The dryness in my throat made it hard to swallow. My shirt felt plastered to my skin with sweat. My mind raced, but I forced myself to stay alert, scanning the sidewalk for any kind of difference. A new crack, a new patch of grass, a new mailbox, anything to tell me I was getting somewhere else. I never found any. It was all one long repeat of the same details. Eventually, I reached another flickering post and paused. My ears strained for the chain sound, but it seemed distant. My breathing was ragged, and I slumped against the lamppost, letting its weak light wash over me. I stared down the street, hoping for a sign of dawn. The darkness stayed. The next lamp flickered in the distance. My head felt heavy, and my eyes stung from exhaustion. I clenched my fists and pushed away from the pole. I told myself, just keep going. You have to keep going. And so I did. I wish I had a neat conclusion or some final moment of rescue. But all I can say is that I kept moving forward, block after block, lamppost after lamppost, hearing those chains drag behind me whenever I slowed down. The end never showed itself. The street just went on, flickering light after flickering light, with my steps echoing on the asphalt and that scraping sound reminding me I wasn't safe. I'm still walking. I'm still searching for a corner I recognize, a street sign I can trust, a break in that endless row of flickering lights. I haven't found it yet. I always thought my grandfather's old trunk was just another piece of junk in our dusty attic. It stood against the far wall, covered with cobwebs and surrounded by boxes of broken lamps and moth-eaten blankets. My father never let me open it, and he seemed uneasy whenever I mentioned it. Last month, after sorting through some boxes, I found a tarnished key in an envelope marked with my grandfather's initials. I didn't think much of it at first, but I got curious. I headed for that trunk, key in hand, heart pounding with a strange sense of anticipation. I was alone in the house. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I flicked on the light, but the bulb was weak. The attic smelled like old newspapers and stale air. Dust floated around me every time I moved a box. I dragged the trunk into the center of the attic, brushed off the thick layer of dirt on top, and tried the key. It fit. I twisted it slowly. The lock gave a heavy click, like it hadn't opened in years. The lid creaked when I lifted it, and a rush of musty odor hit my nostrils. It smelled like damp wood and something sour. Inside the trunk, I saw cloth wrappings tied with thin rope. I undid the rope. One by one, I lifted out 5 wooden masks. Each mask looked hand-carved. Their surfaces had small chips and scratches, like they'd been used or handled a lot in the past. Each mask showed a different expression. One looked twisted with fear. One was contorted in anger. Another seemed blank with desolation. 2 of them were harder to read, but they both had strange grimaces. The wood felt rough against my fingertips. My gut tightened because they seemed more than just carvings. There was a tension about them, like they were alive somehow. I took them downstairs to my bedroom. I set them in a row on my desk. I felt a chill run down my arms. I noticed each had a small symbol etched on the inside. I couldn't recognize it. It looked like a spiral or a cluster of overlapping lines. My room felt colder than usual. I shut the door. My chest tightened when I glanced at the mask with the expression of fear. Something about its eyes made me uncomfortable. They were just hollow cuts, but I sensed a focus there, like it was staring at me. I told myself it was just an old artifact. I picked it up and turned it over. That symbol was carved deep into the wood. The edges were scorched like someone had burned it in. My scalp prickled. I put the mask down on my desk, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. My hands shook a little. I tried to steady myself by taking a few long breaths. After a couple of minutes, I felt calmer. Then I got a sudden urge. I wanted to try it on just to see how it looked. It felt like a bad idea, but I couldn't help myself. My curiosity was too strong. I lifted the mask and placed it over my face. The wood felt cold at first, and it pressed against my cheeks. I adjusted the straps in the back. Once it was secured, I opened my eyes. Everything went dark. There was a rushing in my ears like wind howling in a tight space. I felt a jolt in my chest, followed by a strange pressure. My limbs felt heavy. Suddenly, I had the sense that I wasn't standing in my bedroom anymore. My stomach lurched as if I'd stepped off a ledge. For a brief moment, I thought I was falling through a void. Then I realized I could see again. A dim, flickering light illuminated a place that felt alien. I heard my own breathing echoing inside the mask. I saw figures standing in front of me. They wore masks similar to the ones I'd found in the trunk. Their clothes looked dark, ragged, but I couldn't make out details. A low hum filled the air, and it sounded like it was coming from every direction. My heart pounded so hard that my legs trembled. My neck stiffened when I noticed that all those figures faced me. Their heads tilted in a slow, synchronized way. My chest felt tight and my throat went dry. I tried to speak, but only a raspy breath came out. The figures started murmuring. I couldn't understand their words. It sounded like they were chanting a single phrase, but I had no idea what it meant. The chanting got louder, rising and falling in a pattern. My pulse raced. My body felt invaded, like something was forcing its way inside my torso. My arms tingled. I felt my muscles twitching. For a second, I thought my body didn't belong to me. I heard a buzzing in my head like static, and my vision blurred. Those masked figures kept staring. Their eyes were just hollow holes. I tasted copper on my tongue. Sweat beaded on my forehead and dripped onto my eyelashes. I tore the mask off my face. My bedroom lights almost blinded me. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. My chest heaved. The mask was still in my hands. My palms were damp with sweat. I felt my face, checking if anything was wrong with my skin. My cheeks burned and my heart was thundering. I stood there panting for what felt like a full minute. Slowly, I turned toward the mirror on my closet door. My reflection made my stomach flip. My own face looked twisted in the same expression as the mask, eyes wide, brows raised in a trembling sort of shock. I blinked several times, but the expression stayed. It was me, but it wasn't my usual face. I swallowed hard and forced my facial muscles to relax. After a few seconds, I started to look more like myself, but there was still something off about my eyes. I set the mask on my desk. It felt like it was pulsing, or maybe I was shaking. I could feel my heart beating in my fingertips. I felt sweaty and cold at the same time. I moved to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and looked into the mirror there. My eyes seemed darker, as if the rims of my irises had changed color. I could still see that hint of fear in my expression, like the mask had left a permanent mark on me. I returned to my bedroom, closed the door, and stared at the row of masks. The air smelled stale, and my forehead throbbed. I tried to calm myself, pacing around the room. It felt like I'd just woken up from a nightmare, but I was wide awake. My arms felt like lead. I thought about throwing the masks away, but I was also drawn to them. I couldn't shake the urge to inspect the other masks. Maybe I wanted to see if each mask would show me a different place, a different set of figures. I reached for the second mask, the one with the expression of anger. Its carved features were sharper, with deep lines around the eyes and mouth. I lifted it. The inside had the same strange symbol, burned into the wood. My mouth felt dry. My gut told me to stop. Instead, I brought the mask to my face. I felt that cold pressure again, like it was leaching warmth out of my skin. I slipped the strap around my head. My vision went dark, followed by that same sensation of falling. Then I was back in that dark place. The chanting figures were there again. This time their murmuring sounded more aggressive. It resonated in my chest. The air felt thicker, almost suffocating. The mask on my face felt tighter. My teeth clenched and my jaw hurt. I noticed one of the figures stepping closer. It wore a mask with a jagged mouth like a snarl. Its shoulders jerked with every chant. I felt my own arms tense up, and my fists curled without me telling them to. My breathing got faster. I felt like I wanted to lash out, to push something away. My muscles were trembling with this intense tension. I shut my eyes. My hands found the edges of the mask and I yanked it off. Again, my bedroom lights hit me. I stumbled back. My shoulders burned with the tension. I realized my hands were clenched so hard that my knuckles ached. I tried to open them, but it was difficult. I exhaled and dropped the mask onto the bed. My gaze moved to the mirror. My face had that same tightness in the jaw, the same anger in the eyes. I saw it even in the corners of my mouth. I looked like I wanted to punch a hole in the wall. I forced a deep breath. My reflection gradually softened, but I still sensed a raw energy under my skin. At that point, I couldn't ignore what was happening. These masks did something. They transported me somewhere. I rubbed my temples, trying to think clearly. My stomach churned. I realized I was starving, but I also felt too unsettled to eat. I grabbed a bottle of water from my nightstand and took a few gulps. My hands shook the entire time. I told myself I should lock these masks back in the trunk and forget them, but I couldn't. The curiosity was too strong. I needed to figure out what they were and why they showed me that place. I decided to take a short break. I left my room, went into the living room, and turned on the TV for background noise. Some reality show was on. I didn't pay attention to the dialogue. I sat on the couch, tapping my foot, trying to settle my nerves. My mind kept drifting back to the masks. My eyes drifted to the hallway that led to my bedroom. Even from the living room, I felt pulled by them. After a few minutes, I stood up, turned off the TV, and walked back to my room. The 5 masks were still there. 2 of them I had already tried. 3 remained. 1 with that desolate expression, and the other 2 with strange grimaces I couldn't categorize. I touched the one that looked empty and hopeless. Its eyes were narrow, the mouth a straight line. The lines around it looked deep and hollow. My breathing caught. I picked it up. The inside had the same burned symbol. My heart thumped. My limbs felt weak. I knew it was a terrible idea to try this one, but it was like I was on autopilot. The strap went around my head, and everything went dark once more. I reappeared in the same dark realm. The masked figures circled me this time. They moved slowly, each step making a soft scraping sound on what felt like uneven ground. I heard their low chanting again, but it seemed quieter, more drawn out. The room or space around me felt larger but emptier. The air smelled damp, like wet stone. My body felt heavy, almost numb. I couldn't move my arms or legs the way I wanted. I sank to my knees and my chest felt hollow. My eyes stung and I felt tears sliding down my cheeks inside the mask. I had no idea why I was crying. My heart hurt, like a huge weight had settled in it. A wave of despair flowed through me, more intense than anything I'd felt before. My mind screamed at me to get the mask off. I forced my trembling hands to grab the edges of the wood. The chanting grew louder the moment I touched the mask. It felt like the figures were urging me to stay. My muscles shook. I pulled at the mask, and it resisted for a second, like it was stuck. Then it came off, and I fell forward, catching myself on my hands. I was back in my bedroom. My breath came in ragged gasps, tears still rolling down my face. I wiped them on my sleeve, struggling to keep calm. My chest felt hollow. My mind felt crowded with thoughts of hopelessness. I glanced at the mirror. My reflection looked sunken. My eyes were red, and my mouth hung open a little. I looked exhausted and defeated. I spat out a curse under my breath and threw the mask onto the floor. My entire body shook with adrenaline and fear. These masks were dangerous. They were doing something real to me. I needed to stop. But I stood there, panting, and I felt that small part of me wanting to see what else might happen with the remaining 2 masks. It was like an addiction. My curiosity was stronger than my sense of self-preservation. I took a quick shower instead, hoping the hot water would clear my head. The water pressure pounded against my shoulders and steam filled the bathroom. I stared at the tiles, trying to focus on the sensation of warmth on my skin. My legs felt shaky. I got out and dried off, then sat on the edge of my bed in my towel. The masks were still on the desk and the floor. Their carved expressions seemed to watch me, even though they didn't have eyes in the real sense. My heart sped up just looking at them. I lifted the corner of my towel to dab sweat off my forehead. My throat felt tight. It was hard to swallow. After a few minutes, I decided to gather the masks and put them back in the trunk. I went to the attic. Each step I took up the ladder made my palms sweat. I could feel the weight of those masks in my arms as if they were heavier than simple wood. I placed them all back into the trunk, closed the lid, and turned the key until it locked. Then I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the trunk. Part of me expected the lid to pop open on its own, but it stayed closed. The attic felt dead quiet. Even the light bulb seemed to flicker less than before. I went downstairs and returned to my bedroom. My body felt sore like I'd run a marathon. I sat on my bed and stared at the spot where the masks had been. My reflection in the closet mirror still looked tense. My facial features had returned to normal, but my eyes looked weary. I lay back on the bed, arms resting at my sides, and closed my eyes. I listened to the sounds of my own breathing. My mind raced with questions about those masks. Who made them? Why my grandfather kept them locked away? And what was happening in that dark place I saw? I decided I'd keep the trunk locked and try to forget about it. But in that moment, I couldn't ignore the fact that I had changed. My face still felt tight, like some residue of those expressions lingered under my skin. Even blinking felt heavier than usual, like my eyelids were weighed down. I kept thinking about those chanting figures. They were waiting for me. Every time I tried to push the memory away, I heard their murmurs in my head. A shiver ran through me. I forced my eyes open again, just to focus on reality. My bedroom light was bright. The colors were clear. My bed felt solid under me. I told myself I'd stop messing with those masks. I'd keep them locked up for good. But I also knew I might not be able to resist the pull. The images of that place and those masked shapes were burned into my memory. Even now, hours after locking them away, I can still feel that hum in my chest. I can still see a shadow in the corner of my room when I look away too fast. My reflection sometimes shows a slight twist at the corner of my mouth or a trembling eyelid, almost like the mask is still there. I don't know what those masks really are or how they work. But I've learned my lesson. They aren't just family heirlooms. There's something alive in them or connected to them, and once they touch your face, they leave something behind. I'm stuck with that feeling now. It's like I'm never entirely alone. I can sense that darkness lurking just beneath my normal thoughts. I can feel a hint of fear in my veins or anger or emptiness, depending on which mask I remember the most. They're locked away in the trunk, but part of them is locked inside me too, and I'm not sure if I can ever shake it off. I never expected to shiver inside a recording studio, but that's exactly what happened the day I set foot in the basement of that old castle. I remember stepping down the narrow stairs, feeling the cold stone against my fingertips when I brushed the wall for balance. My breath felt heavy. I was excited to record music in a unique place, but a part of me wanted to turn around and walk back up into the daylight. I ignored that thought because this was a once-in-a-lifetime invitation, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful or cowardly. I'm a guitarist, and I had gotten a call from a producer who said he was setting up a temporary studio in a small chamber below a castle known for its historical significance. He made it sound like an adventure. The castle was old, built centuries ago, and it sat on a hillside surrounded by thick stone walls. On the outside, the place looked sturdy, almost majestic. On the inside, at least at ground level, there were dusty corridors and heavy wooden doors. Paintings of people in outdated clothes hung on the walls. The corridors smelled like old books and faint perfume, the kind you might find in a museum. The caretaker led me and the producer through a stone hallway to a heavy door that opened onto a spiral staircase. It took us below ground. Each step down echoed with a dull thud. The caretaker explained that this lower area had once served as storage for supplies, but some people said it had also been a holding cell at one point. I ran my hand across the cold wall. The surface felt damp. My nose picked up an odd mix of mildew and stale air. When I reached the bottom, I saw some chairs, cables, and a few microphones already set up. The producer had brought a portable mixing console, a laptop, and some other equipment. The caretaker left us alone, saying we could lock up when we finished. The door above closed with a loud creak, and that clank of metal as he turned the key made me feel trapped for a second. I heard the producer messing with the console, so I tried to brush off my nerves and focus on the job. The room looked like a dungeon. It had uneven stone floors, walls with patches of mold, and a ceiling that barely cleared my head. I'm about 6 feet tall, so I had to watch where I walked to avoid bumping into the hanging light fixture the producer had set up. The temperature down there was cold enough to make me keep my jacket on. I set my guitar case on a small table, then opened it. My hands were already stiff from the cold, so I did a few finger stretches to loosen up. We wanted to record a few demo tracks. The producer said this location might give the songs a natural reverb effect. He wasn't wrong. When I strummed my guitar for a quick test, the sound echoed in a deep way. It almost seemed to linger in the air longer than normal. It sounded interesting, so I nodded at the producer. He gave me a thumbs up and pressed the record button on his laptop. I started with some basic chords. The cold air dried out my throat, so I coughed a couple of times. Then I played a short melody I'd been working on at home. After I finished, I looked at the producer for feedback. He seemed confused. He said something about hearing a faint hum in the headphones. We decided to do another take to see if it was just a glitch or interference. On the second take, I played the same melody, but slower. My fingers felt uncomfortable on the metal strings because of the cold. I forced myself to relax and tried to ignore the numbness. As soon as I finished, The producer took off his headphones and walked over to me. He said he was picking up a strange sound, like a soft choir. He asked if I heard anything while I was playing. I hadn't noticed anything unusual, but my ears weren't covered by studio headphones at that moment. I just heard my guitar and the slight drip of water somewhere behind me. We decided to listen to the playback right away. He hit play, and we both leaned in. At first I heard my guitar, a bit of reverb, then something else. It was quiet, and it sounded like a handful of voices. It wasn't clear, but it felt rhythmic, like some kind of chant. The language was impossible to identify. Each phrase was so faint, it almost blended with the guitar notes. At first I felt curious more than anything. We thought maybe there was some feedback or an echo from outside. But the caretaker had locked the door, and the area had thick walls. We shouldn't have been picking up anything from the outside world. I decided to ignore it. We tried another take, thinking maybe it was just the microphone picking up weird acoustics. This time I played a different arrangement, something a bit more upbeat. The entire time I felt a chill on the back of my neck. When I finished, I took the headphones from the producer and listened directly as he played it back. I heard the same chanting again, only a bit louder. It wasn't in sync with my playing. It sounded like a background track that came from a distant room, but there was no other room. My gut started to tighten. The hair on my arms stood up. I heard my heartbeat in my ears. We kept quiet for a moment, staring at each other. The producer tried to say something, but he trailed off. I realized I was holding my breath, so I exhaled and told him to let me do another track. I said maybe we could isolate the sound or figure out its source. A part of me wanted to keep going, even though my stomach felt uneasy. I'm not sure why. Maybe I felt drawn to it because it was so strange. My body felt tense, but at the same time, I was eager to see what would happen. On the next recording, I tried a more ambient approach, just some slow picking and chords that resonated in the stone chamber. My fingertips felt stiff, but I fought through it. When I listened to the playback, the chant was clearer. It had a definite pattern, like short bursts of syllables repeated over and over. I heard something that resembled words, but I couldn't repeat them. It didn't sound like any language I'd ever encountered. The producer said he felt goosebumps. I noticed my hands were shaking. My breathing became shallow. The tension in my chest got worse. I wanted to stop for a second and process this, but I couldn't resist hitting play one more time. I thought maybe the chant would disappear if we listened again. Instead, it sounded louder, like the voices were multiplying. I paused the file and placed my hand on the stone wall next to me. The surface felt icy, and I sensed a subtle vibration, like a faint hum inside the stone. I tried tapping the wall to see if it resonated, but it only produced a dull knock. The producer suggested moving the microphones to a different spot in the room. We carried the stands and cables a few feet over, closer to the old iron gate at the end of the chamber. That gate looked locked, but I noticed a small gap in the stones behind it. The air flowing through that gap smelled stale and slightly sour. I stepped back and set my guitar on a chair while the producer adjusted some levels. We recorded again. As soon as I started strumming, a wave of anxiety hit me. My heart pounded. I heard every note echo in that cramped space. The environment felt heavier. By the time I finished the track, I had broken into a light sweat. The producer stared at his screen, then looked at me. I could see his hands trembling. We listened together to the playback. The chanting was loud, almost overwhelming. It didn't drown out the guitar completely, but it hovered right below it, like it was woven into the sound waves. It had a haunting rhythm, repeating certain syllables in a constant loop. I felt a twisting sensation in my gut. My ears rang and my hands felt numb. I wanted to keep playing. I couldn't explain why, but I felt pulled to continue. The producer seemed torn. He asked if we should pack up and leave. My mouth felt dry and I could barely speak. I shook my head and said I wanted to do one more track. I felt like something was calling me. My chest was tight, and my neck muscles tensed. I slid my fingers along the guitar strings to test if I had any feeling left in them. I still did, so I started to pick out a new melody. I improvised, letting my instincts guide me. As I played, I felt the vibration in the walls grow stronger, like a low rumble beneath my feet. The cold air brushed against my arms, but I was sweating. My throat felt tight. My ears started to ring more intensely. After a minute or two, I ended with a sharp chord. The sound bounced back, filling the chamber. I saw the producer's eyes widen. He tapped the stop button on the recording software. We both stood there, tense and silent. We listened to the final take. The chanting was louder than ever, and it seemed urgent. It was the same unknown language, the same patterns, but now it had more presence. It sounded close, as though the voices were right in front of the microphones. My entire body felt cold, and my breaths came in short bursts. I noticed the producer wiping sweat off his forehead. We locked eyes. We didn't know what to say. That's when I realized the gate on the far side of the room was trembling slightly. I heard a metallic rattle, very soft. I approached it, and the echo of each step made my pulse spike. I tried shining a flashlight through the bars. The gap behind them led to a small alcove. I didn't see any movement, just more stone walls and darkness. The chanting at this point was only on the recording, not audible in the room itself. But I sensed something in the air, a tension that wouldn't leave. The producer insisted we try a playback through the speakers to see if the sound changed once it filled the room. He connected the laptop to a small portable speaker and hit play. The moment the chant echoed through the chamber, I felt pressure in my ears. The walls seemed to vibrate again, and the gate rattled louder. I stepped back. I felt a wave of nausea. My stomach cramped. The producer stopped the playback. His hands were shaking so much he almost dropped the laptop. We waited in that silence, just breathing, trying to calm down. At that point, I started packing my guitar. My fingers felt clumsy. I could barely zip the case. The producer grabbed his gear, though he was moving slowly, like he was in shock. Neither of us wanted to talk. We just wanted to get out of there. The air felt heavy. My legs felt stiff and my shoulders were tense. I couldn't shake the feeling that the chanting was still in my head, even though the room was silent. We looked around for anything we might have missed. We shut down the console, coiled up the cables, and carried everything toward the staircase. My heart was still racing and my skin felt cold. My palms were damp with sweat. I felt dizzy for a moment, so I paused on the first step to steady myself against the wall. The producer stepped beside me and asked if I was okay. I nodded, but I didn't feel okay. My mind was racing with questions. What did we record? Where was that sound coming from? Should we tell the caretaker? When we reached the door at the top of the stairs, it took us a moment to unlock it. My hands were shaking so badly I kept fumbling with the key. Finally, I heard the click, and I pushed the door open. We stepped into the corridor. The air felt different there, still musty, but not as freezing. I closed the door behind us. I leaned against it for a second, feeling my racing pulse begin to slow down. The producer looked at me with wide eyes, and I saw the same mix of dread and confusion on his face that I felt in my gut. We walked through the corridor to the main hall. The caretaker was reading a newspaper in a small office near the entrance. He glanced at us and asked if we got what we needed. I hesitated. I considered telling him about the chanting, but I didn't know how to explain it. I felt too shaken to have a calm conversation. The producer mumbled something about packing up early. The caretaker just nodded. We left without giving him many details. Outside, the sun was still up, but it was late in the afternoon. The castle's stone walls looked dark and uninviting. We carried our equipment to the producer's van. I felt the breeze on my face, and it helped clear my mind a bit. I took a few deep breaths. My skin was sticky with sweat and my heart rate was still high. I put my guitar in the back and climbed into the passenger seat. We drove away without speaking. I felt drained, like I'd just run a marathon. My thoughts kept returning to that chanting. It played on a loop in my head. I felt an urge to grab my guitar right there in the van and play something, but I didn't want to hear that chant anymore. I just wanted silence. I needed time to calm down and think clearly. That night, I lay awake in my apartment, hearing small sounds in my own living room. I kept thinking I heard faint whispers. I'd get up and check, but there was nothing. My arms were covered in goosebumps. My muscles were tense and I couldn't settle down. I tried to push the memory of that basement out of my mind, but the chant wouldn't leave. My ears still picked up the echo of those voices, repeating their unknown words. I felt uneasy and slightly panicked. Since that day, I haven't listened to those recordings. The producer tried to call me once to talk about them, but I avoided the conversation. I still feel drawn to the music we captured, but a tight knot in my stomach warns me to stay away. I haven't been back to that castle, and I don't plan to return. I can't forget what I felt in that dungeon-like space. The memory stays with me, just as vivid as when I was there, hearing those voices through my headphones and feeling my body go cold. Sometimes, late at night, I think about going back or listening to the files on my laptop. But every time I consider it, my heart starts pounding all over again and I decide against it. I've never experienced anything like that before, and I hope I never do again. I heard about this antique store from a friend who swore it had the strangest collection he'd ever seen. He told me the owner barely spoke and the place always felt cold, even on hot days. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt a pull, like I had to see it myself. I decided to go one evening just to satisfy my curiosity. I expected it to be a typical dusty shop with old furniture and random trinkets. I was wrong. It was something else. It felt wrong as soon as I stepped inside. I remember how dim it was. The lights on the ceiling were yellowish and they flickered in this uneven way. Every shelf and table had items piled up. Vases with chipped edges, tarnished silverware, odd sculptures that looked handmade. The air smelled stale, like a room that hadn't been aired out in months. There was a constant hum coming from somewhere, maybe a broken refrigerator or an ancient ventilation system. My eyes took a while to adjust. I couldn't see the owner at first. Then I noticed a figure behind a high counter, hunched over something. When I walked up, he raised his head, gave me a quick nod, and went back to fiddling with a small wooden box. I wanted to say hello, but he didn't look interested, so I kept my mouth shut. I wandered to a corner that had shelves stacked with old books and small, ornate objects. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall. My reflection looked stretched and odd. I felt a chill on my neck. The place was quiet, except for that low hum and the faint sound of my own breathing. I saw a brass doorknob lying on a velvet cloth. Next to it was a pocket watch with a dull bronze finish. It had a floral pattern etched on the cover. Something about that watch grabbed my attention. The texture looked uneven and it gave off this strange vibration in my hand. It was subtle, but I felt it buzz against my palm. My friend had mentioned that items in this store had a weird energy. I thought about that as I turned the watch over, trying to find a price tag or some marking. I wanted to see if it still worked, so I pressed the small latch on the side to pop the cover open. The glass was scratched, and the hands were stuck in place. They pointed to some random time, sometime between 2 and 3, but I couldn't say exactly. I aimed my flashlight at the dial to get a better look, just to see if the numbers were worn off. But I didn't see a normal clock face. Instead, I saw a tiny room that looked way too detailed. It showed 4 walls with shelves, a counter, and dusty floorboards. At first, I thought it was just an intricate illustration. Then the scene shifted. I saw the shadow of a figure move across that tiny space. My breath caught in my throat, and I almost dropped the watch. The figure seemed to stop, almost like it was staring at me. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I lifted my gaze to see if the store owner was watching me, but he was gone. The store felt empty now. I stood there holding the watch, my flashlight trained on the glass. My hand started shaking. The scene in the watch looked exactly like the store I was standing in, but without me or the owner. The shelves and tables were in the same spots, just in miniature form. I snapped the cover shut, put the watch back on the velvet cloth, and felt my heart pound. I wanted to walk away, but some urge made me pick it up again. That's when I heard a slight ticking noise. It was faint, like a heartbeat coming from inside the watch. It grew a bit louder when I held the watch closer to my ear. The ticking wasn't in sync with anything else around me. It was irregular, but it felt deliberate. I walked to the front counter, half expecting the owner to show up and tell me the price or explain something about it, but he wasn't there. I knocked on the counter, but only silence followed. Eventually, I set some money on the wood and left with the watch in my hand. I didn't care about haggling or finding out the exact cost. I just wanted to get out of there. When I stepped outside, the street felt cooler than normal. It was after sunset and the sky was a hazy gray. I hurried back to my car and tossed the watch on the passenger seat. I felt tense, like I'd done something risky. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. The drive home felt too long. Every time I glanced at the watch, I half expected to see it open by itself. It stayed shut, but the faint ticking kept going. It got under my skin. I live in a small apartment. It's not fancy, but it's quiet. That night, it didn't feel comfortable. I locked the door, turned on all the lights, and put the watch on my kitchen table. I tried to ignore it, but the ticking echoed in the empty space. I tried checking my phone, flipping through channels on TV, anything to distract myself, but after a few minutes I couldn't resist. I flipped open the cover and pointed my phone's flashlight at the glass. The little scene was still there. This time there was no shadow moving around. The room inside the watch looked dark, like it was nighttime there as well. I shut it again and rubbed my eyes. My pulse was racing. I felt sweat on the back of my neck. I felt a surge of guilt or maybe regret. I wondered if bringing this thing home had been a mistake, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. Something about it called to me. I wanted to see more. I left it on the table and went to take a shower, hoping hot water would calm me down. It sort of worked, but when I came back to the kitchen, the watch was open on its own. That made my stomach knot. I stood still, just staring at it from a few feet away. The face pointed toward the ceiling. I could hear the ticking louder than before. My heart thumped in my chest. I stepped closer. The scene inside showed the same store, but now one of the lights was on in that tiny room. I saw shelves in the background. The little figure was there again, a vague silhouette near the back. I slammed the cover shut, took a step back, and nearly tripped on my own feet. I decided to put the watch in a drawer. I grabbed a dish towel to hold it so I wouldn't have to touch the metal. It felt cold against the cloth anyway. I slammed the drawer shut and tried to go on with my night. I wasn't in the mood to cook, so I ordered takeout. While I waited, I kept peeking at that drawer, half expecting it to pop open. It never did, but I felt uneasy. My head hurt, and my shoulders were tense. Later, when I picked up my food at the door, the delivery guy mentioned I looked pale. I brushed it off. Inside, I felt like I couldn't take a full breath. After I ate, I tried to watch something on TV, but I couldn't focus. That constant ticking noise seeped through the drawer. I could hear it under the hum of the refrigerator and the noises from outside. It felt like a countdown, but it wasn't going in any pattern I could recognize. Sometimes the ticks sped up, sometimes they dragged. I sat there, staring at the TV, but not registering anything on the screen. Eventually, I got up and walked back to the kitchen. I had to see it again. I opened the drawer, feeling a flutter of dread. The watch was still there, closed. The ticking was steady. My stomach churned. I flipped it open and pointed my phone's light inside. The scene had shifted again. Now it showed the store's entrance, the door slightly open. The shadow was near the threshold, as if it was leaning out, checking the street. My pulse quickened. I shut the watch with a snap, wrapped it in the towel, and decided I had to figure out what was going on. I didn't sleep much that night. I heard ticking through the walls. I swear I heard footsteps in my hallway, but every time I checked, there was no one there. My mind raced with questions, but I tried to keep a grip on reality. When the sun finally rose, I felt a slight relief. I took the watch out again. For a moment, I considered driving straight back to the store and tossing it on the counter, but part of me wanted to understand it. I thought maybe I could catch that shadow, or see if the room changed during the day. I opened the watch in the morning light. The scene inside was darker than my apartment. It looked like night in there, even though it was daytime outside. The shadow was gone, but I noticed an odd flicker in one corner. It looked like a flickering light. I thought I could see a small reflection on the floor, like water or a shiny surface. It made no sense. I felt a chill run up my arms. My heart pounded again, and my mouth went dry. There was something unnatural about how that space existed inside this object. I decided I needed to check that antique store again. Maybe the owner would have answers. I got dressed and headed out, watch in my jacket pocket. The drive there felt slow, and I kept glancing at the seat next to me, expecting the watch to open by itself again. It stayed closed. When I arrived, the store looked different. The lights were off, and the windows had newspapers taped up from the inside. I tried the door, but it was locked. I peered through a gap in the newspaper and saw nothing but darkness. No shapes, no shelves. The place looked gutted. I knocked a few times, called out, but nobody answered. The watch in my pocket gave off a faint tick, 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 matching my heartbeat. I felt trapped. I ended up driving around, trying to calm myself. I stopped by a coffee shop and just sat there, sipping a cup of black coffee, trying to think logically. Maybe the store had closed suddenly. Maybe the owner was just old and decided to retire. But none of that explained the watch. I kept feeling the weight of it in my pocket. Every time it ticked, I felt a jolt in my gut. It felt like it was counting something down. I stayed there for a while, checking my messages on my phone, looking out the window, avoiding any thoughts about that strange store. When I finally went home, I placed the watch on my kitchen counter and stared at it. I paced around, hands shaking, trying to decide what to do. I thought about calling my friend, but I wasn't sure what I'd even say. Part of me worried he'd come over and get involved in something dangerous. I wanted to handle it alone, so I sat down on a chair, rested my elbows on the counter, and opened the watch one more time. Inside, the scene had changed again. I saw a tiny version of my apartment's hallway. My door was in the background, closed. The shadow stood in front of it as if it was about to knock. My lungs tightened. My legs felt weak. I glanced at my real apartment door, expecting to see something. Nothing was there, but the watch showed that silhouette. It was tall, featureless, just a dark shape with a faint outline. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the watch. I forced myself to keep looking. The figure lifted what looked like an arm, reached toward the door handle, then stopped. My real door handle stayed still. I snapped the watch shut, breathing hard, sweat forming on my forehead. I grabbed a towel, wrapped the watch, and shoved it in a box. Then I took that box and put it in the back of my closet. I stacked a few other boxes on top of it. I needed to get it out of sight. The ticking grew faint, but I could still hear it. I left the apartment for a while, just to clear my head. I walked around the block, trying to ignore the sense of dread clinging to my thoughts. Cars passed by and people went about their day. Everything looked normal, but I felt disconnected from it all. When I got back, I stood outside my door for a moment, listening. I heard nothing from inside. That was a relief, but it didn't last. As soon as I stepped in, I noticed a faint noise coming from the closet. The watch was still ticking, louder than ever. My chest felt tight. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and tried to calm down. I decided to wait until nightfall, then drive out of the city and toss the watch somewhere far away. But as night approached, the noise seemed to shift. It wasn't just ticking. I could swear I heard soft scraping like metal on wood. At one point, my lamp flickered. The air felt colder. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to focus. I told myself I'd do it right then. I went to the closet, moved the boxes, and pulled out the watch. It felt heavier. I opened it again, with trembling hands, just to see what it showed. The small scene revealed a dark hallway. It wasn't mine anymore. It looked like that antique store again, but abandoned. The floors were bare. The shelves were gone. I saw a shape crouched in the corner. I couldn't see any features, only a black outline. It slowly turned its head, if it even had one, and faced the glass. I got chills all over my arms. My heart pounded so loud I heard it in my ears. I slammed the watch shut and wrapped it tight in the towel. I drove out of the city. It took me about 40 minutes to find a secluded area off the highway. I parked, got out, and walked a good distance into the woods. It was dark, but I had a flashlight. The ground was uneven, and I almost tripped a few times. When I thought I was far enough, I dug a small hole with a piece of broken branch. I dropped the watch in there, towel and all, and covered it with dirt. The ticking cut off, muffled by the earth. My breathing was ragged and my hands were filthy, but I felt a bit of relief. When I got back to my car, I sat behind the wheel and just stared at the steering column. My head felt light. My nerves were shot, but I drove away. I didn't hear ticking anymore. I tried to convince myself it was over. I told myself I'd never go back to that store or mention it again. I wish that was the end. But sometimes, late at night, I'll be lying in bed and think I hear a faint tick-tick-tick in the distance. I can't tell if it's real or if my mind's playing tricks on me. My friend hasn't asked about the place again. I never brought it up. I don't plan on searching for that store or the owner. Part of me hopes someone else dug up that watch and destroyed it, but I have no way of knowing. All I can do is try to move on. Still, I keep the TV on when I go to sleep because the silence makes me imagine that ticking. It's faint, but it feels close sometimes, and it sends a chill across my entire body. I can't help but wonder if that shadow is still out there, moving around inside the watch, looking for a way back. And that's all I want to say about it. I'm done. I just hope I never see that watch again. I pushed the old doors open and heard a scraping sound from the hinges. The smell of stale air rushed out, and my eyes tried to adjust to the darkness inside. My heartbeat felt heavy, and my palms were damp. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I wanted to see everything before I lost my nerve. That was my plan. Walk straight in, keep my flashlight steady, and not overthink. I had always liked exploring empty buildings, but this one felt different from the start. I shone my flashlight along the corridor. The peeling wallpaper had a yellowish color under the beam, and pieces of it flapped against the walls. The carpet beneath my shoes felt worn and sticky. I noticed the lack of any strong smell like mold or rot. It was just dry, stale air. I moved slowly, trying not to trip over broken floorboards. The place wasn't lit, so my flashlight was the only source of light at that moment. I reached a set of heavy double doors that led into the main auditorium. I remember taking a deep breath and pushing them. The doors made a low groan. A rush of cool air met me, but it felt like it didn't have any particular smell. It just felt old. I stepped inside and saw the rows of seats. Each seat was covered in a large sheet that had a dusty outline. They looked like hunched figures in the dark. My flashlight beam made some of the sheets ripple, though I wasn't sure if there was a draft or if my imagination was playing tricks on me. I walked down the center aisle. My footsteps were loud, and I became aware of how quiet everything else was. Every step caused a small cloud of dust to rise from the carpet. I stopped a few times to aim my flashlight at the seats, trying to see underneath the sheets. They were empty, just chairs, but the shape of the covers made it seem like someone was sitting there. I felt my heart beat faster. I swallowed and rubbed the back of my neck. I realized my breathing was shallow, so I paused again to calm myself. It wasn't that I was in physical danger. It was more about the feeling that something was off. When I reached the stage, I set my flashlight on a small ledge and used both hands to pull myself up. The stage was a bit higher than I expected. The wood creaked under my weight. I felt a slight give in the boards, but they held me. The smell was the same: dust, stale air, and nothing else. I stood for a moment, looking out at the auditorium. The flashlight on the ledge cast an odd glow across the seats, revealing sheets and bits of the worn floor. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered on. It happened without any sound of a generator or switch. They just blinked a few times and then stayed on, casting bright beams across the stage. The abrupt shift in lighting made me squint, and I raised a hand to block the glare. My heart pounded. I looked around for a breaker box or something that might explain why the lights were working. I didn't see any modern equipment. The stage lights looked old, with some rust along the metal casings. The sudden brightness made the auditorium seats look different. I couldn't see the individual sheets as clearly. Instead, I saw dark outlines in each seat, almost like shadows. They weren't moving, but they looked like silhouettes. I felt my skin prickle, and my muscles tensed. I had a strong urge to turn off the lights, but I didn't see a switch. My mouth felt dry. I stood there, unsure of what to do next. I heard something from the balconies above. A low whisper, then another. It sounded like 2 or 3 voices, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. I felt my stomach tighten. I thought about leaving. My feet felt heavy, and I gritted my teeth. I wanted to find a logical explanation for the lights and these whispers. I took a few steps across the stage. Each step produced a creak. The old wooden board shifted a bit under my weight. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. The hair on my arm stood up. I scanned the balconies with my eyes. I didn't see any movement, only the shapes of the seats and the railings. Then I heard the whispers again. They were a bit louder, like they were encouraging me. It felt like someone was telling me to keep going. I couldn't make out any words. It was more like breathy sounds. My heartbeat was fast and my breathing came in short bursts. My skin felt clammy. I tried to steady myself and look at the back of the stage. A large curtain hung there. It was a deep red color that looked almost brown in the dim stage lights. The bottom edge of the curtain moved a little, like there was a breeze behind it. I stepped closer. The floor creaked again. I saw faint shapes behind the curtain, but they weren't clear. They looked like silhouettes shifting from one side to another. I clenched my fists to stop my hands from trembling. I didn't smell anything new. I didn't hear anything besides my own breathing and the muffled whispers from the balconies. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I tried to think of a reason for this. Maybe the building had some leftover power connected to old wiring. Maybe there were people squatting. But that didn't explain the silhouettes or the whispering that seemed to come from nowhere. I kept walking toward the curtain. My legs felt stiff, and I had a slight tremor in my right hand. I had left my flashlight on the edge of the stage, so I only had the stage lights and their dim beams overhead. When I was about a foot away from the curtain, I reached out and touched the heavy fabric. It felt rough and dusty. I pushed it aside, just enough to peek behind it. The backstage area was dark. I could see a few old set pieces leaning against the walls. Wooden flats, broken chairs, and some ropes hung from the rafters. I didn't see anyone, but I felt like there were shapes moving in the shadows. I stepped forward. The dust was thicker and I almost coughed. I stifled it and tried to breathe through my nose. I stopped when I heard a faint scraping sound near the back wall. It reminded me of something dragging across the floor. I aimed my gaze in that direction but didn't see anything. The lights overhead flickered a little, then stabilized. I heard the whispers again, but they sounded slightly closer. They seemed to come from behind one of the large pieces of scenery. My heart hammered. I felt beads of sweat forming on my forehead. I wiped them off with the back of my hand. I took a step toward the scenery piece. It looked like part of a fake city skyline, with tall wooden panels. They were chipped and had missing paint. As I moved, I caught sight of another shape shifting around the corner. It was dark, almost like a shadow in the corner of my eye. I turned my head, but nothing was there. I felt a jolt of adrenaline in my chest. My breathing was shallow again, and I realized I was shaking. I started to back away. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see whatever was back there. The scraping noise happened again, this time from the opposite side. It was steady, like something heavy being dragged along the floor. I gripped a nearby rope for support. It felt rough in my hand, and a bit of old dust came off on my fingers. My mouth was dry, so I swallowed a few times. I took a moment to catch my breath and scanned the rest of the backstage area. There was a door to the left, maybe leading to a storage room. To the right was a narrow hallway. I thought about checking the hallway, but I didn't want to wander too far without a clear sense of where I was going. I remembered the encouraging whispers. They sounded like they wanted me to perform or do something on stage. I felt a chill when I considered that possibility. I walked back toward the stage, keeping my eyes on the dark corners. I shoved the curtain aside with my shoulder and stepped out under the lights again. The whispering from the balconies got a little louder, like it was responding to my return. I glanced up, but I only saw the same old seats and railings. My flashlight was still where I left it. I picked it up and clicked it on. The stage lights were bright, but my flashlight still helped me see under the seat covers. I swept the beam across the front row. The sheets rippled a bit, like there was a light breeze. My throat felt tight. I took a few steps toward the edge of the stage. The silhouettes in the seats looked more solid now. I could almost make out the shape of heads and shoulders under the sheets, but I knew the chairs themselves had high backs. I stood still, unsure of what to do next. The whispers in the balconies continued. They had different pitches. Some were low, some were a bit higher. They never formed words I could recognize. My mind raced with questions. Was I imagining this? Were there speakers hidden somewhere? Was someone playing a trick on me? I decided to speak. My voice came out shaky at first. I just said, "Hello?" It echoed a bit in the large room. The whispers paused for a moment, then started again. My chest felt tight, and I exhaled slowly. I wasn't sure how to proceed. Then, as I stood there, the curtain at the back of the stage moved again. I turned around and saw those faint shapes shifting behind the fabric. They seemed to beckon me, like they wanted me to go back there. I stayed where I was. My legs felt weak and my breathing was uneven. I directed my flashlight at the curtain, but it only highlighted the dust particles in the air. The shapes behind it were too dark to make out. Another wave of cold air brushed past me and I shivered. The stage lights above me flickered once, then stayed on. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move. My feet shuffled toward the curtain. My mind was racing with possibilities. I thought maybe I'd see old stagehands' equipment or something left behind, but I wasn't entirely sure. I felt a growing sense of fear. It sat in my stomach, heavy and tight. I brushed the curtain aside with my forearm and stepped behind it once more. The backstage area was the same as before, dusty, cluttered with old props, and dimly lit by overhead lights that reached around the edges of the curtain. I walked slowly, shining my flashlight on every surface. I didn't hear scraping now, but I felt a presence, like something was waiting. My mouth was so dry that it felt uncomfortable. I kept swallowing to keep my throat clear. I reached one of the tall set pieces. My flashlight revealed chipped paint and loose screws. I noticed footprints on the floor's dusty surface. They looked recent, but I couldn't tell if they were mine from a few minutes ago or someone else's. I followed the footprints a bit, but they disappeared near a stack of wooden crates. I heard a short whisper to my left, then it stopped. My fingers were shaking around the flashlight, so I gripped it harder. I went around the crates. There was nothing behind them, just a bare wall. I moved back toward the ropes and pulleys that controlled the curtain. The rope I touched earlier hung there, still swaying a bit. There wasn't any wind, so I didn't understand why it was moving. I stared at it, my stomach clenched. I reached out and grabbed it, feeling the rough fibers. The rope was vibrating slightly, like someone had just pulled it. I released it and stepped back. I decided I had seen enough backstage. I turned around and returned to the main stage area. My footsteps felt heavier. Each board made a protesting sound under me. My breathing was fast, and I was sweating. My clothes stuck to my skin. I glanced at the auditorium again. The silhouettes in the seats looked darker, and I still couldn't explain them. The whispers rose from the balconies, more urgent now. It sounded like a crowd encouraging me to do something. I felt trapped under the lights. I walked to the very front of the stage, right near the orchestra pit, and pointed my flashlight at the first row. The white sheets were mostly dusty, but I saw subtle indentations in some of the seats. The seats looked like they were weighed down, but I knew it could just be sagging from age. I lifted my flashlight beam slowly. I didn't see any faces, just dark shapes that had a vague human form. My heart thudded. I wiped sweat off my forehead again. I stood there for what felt like a full minute. My mind was blank except for the urge to get out, but I also felt pulled to stay. The voices in the balconies grew louder, with more variation in tone. My eyes flicked up toward them. The balconies were only partially lit by the overhead fixtures. I saw movement, quick and slight like shadow shifting. I forced myself to speak again, louder this time. I said, "Who's there?" My voice cracked. I scanned the balconies with my flashlight, but all I saw were the old seats and the dusty railings. The whispering continued without stopping. It had no clear direction. It came from all sides above me. My stomach churned, and I realized I was slightly dizzy. I turned to face the stage lights. They were strong, almost blinding. My eyes watered from the brightness. I squinted and looked at the catwalks above. I saw old wiring and more lights. None of it looked modern. I started feeling a mix of curiosity and fear. I wanted to understand how those lights had come on by themselves, yet I also wanted to leave and never come back. I realized my breathing was too fast. I paused and closed my eyes for a few seconds, trying to calm myself. I felt the dust in the air enter my lungs and I coughed. My throat burned. I spat onto the floor, clearing my mouth. The taste of dust lingered. My legs were unsteady, so I bent down and touched the stage floor to steady myself. The wood felt rough with a few splinters. My pulse was throbbing in my ears. After a moment, I looked up. The whispering was still there, but it felt quieter now. I wondered if it was my imagination, or if the voices were waiting for me to continue. I had an overwhelming sense that they wanted a performance, some kind of show. I felt a surge of panic at the idea of being stuck there under the lights, performing forever. That was enough. I made up my mind to leave. I stood up straight and walked briskly to the side of the stage where I had climbed up. I jumped down carefully, feeling the strain in my knees. I kept my flashlight aimed ahead. The seats looked the same, covered in sheets, but the shadows were less distinct now. The bright stage lights had turned them into vague shapes. My heart raced. I didn't look around much. I walked straight toward the doors. I heard the whispers behind me, a soft chorus of voices. They sounded disappointed, but I didn't turn back. I felt my breathing becoming slightly calmer as I approached the exit. I grabbed the door handles and pushed. The same scraping noise from earlier echoed in the corridor. I stepped through, letting the heavy doors swing shut behind me. The corridor felt even darker without the stage lights shining. I clicked my flashlight on again and walked to the main entrance. I didn't hear footsteps following me, but the memory of those whispers stayed in my head. My muscles were tense. I didn't stop until I reached the outer doors. When I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face. I took a deep breath. My lungs felt relief. I looked at the theater's facade, expecting to see lights in the windows, but it was dark. The night around me was quiet. I couldn't hear any more whispers. I stood there, sweating and catching my breath. I glanced back at the old doors. I didn't see any glow from inside. It was just a silent building. My flashlight beam showed only chipped paint and boarded windows. There was no sign of the electricity that had powered the stage lights. My stomach felt unsettled, and my throat was scratchy from the dust. I felt a lingering sense of dread in my chest, like something had followed me out. But I stood still, confirming I was alone in the empty street. I walked away, gripping my flashlight in my hand. I thought about everything that happened in there. The sheets over the seats, the sudden lights, the strange shadows, and the voices in the balconies. I couldn't explain it. I felt uneasy, but I also felt a strange sense of fascination. The building was supposed to be empty and harmless, but it wasn't. At least not for me. I kept moving, each step taking me farther from that silent entrance. I didn't look back again. I felt an immediate rush of adrenaline when I first stood at the edge of that canyon. The wind hit my face with a dry sting, and my eyes scanned the rocky walls on both sides. I had heard about the rugged paths and steep drops, but I had never seen anything that made me think it was dangerous in a supernatural way. People never mentioned missing hikers or strange events. They only talked about the tough trails and the incredible views. But right then, I felt a slight hesitation in my gut. I still wanted to push forward because that's what I do. I chase intense experiences. I just didn't expect the place to feel so unsettling. I arrived in the late morning after driving for several hours on a dirt road. The canyon's entrance had a small sign with some basic warnings. Watch your step, stay aware of falling rocks, and avoid certain ledges when it's windy. Nothing out of the ordinary. I parked my truck on a dusty pull-off and put on my hiking boots. I double-checked my backpack, making sure I had enough water, energy bars, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. My tent was strapped on the outside of my pack. I planned to spend one night there, then hike out in the morning. The first part of the trail was wide and had smooth gravel. I saw a few shrubs and cacti along the path. My boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each step. The sun was hot, but there was also a breeze that moved through the canyon. That wind carried a low hum, which I assumed was the result of air passing through tight gaps in the rock. Every time the wind gusted, I heard a sound that vibrated around the canyon walls. It reminded me of a low drone. It wasn't exactly pleasant, but it wasn't terrifying either. It was just a sound. I walked for about 2 hours, stopping occasionally to take sips of water and look around. The walls of the canyon stretched up on both sides, forming tall cliffs that cast heavy shadows across the trail. The rock faces looked rough and layered. Small stones fell here and there when a gust of wind stirred them loose. I felt a bit nervous every time I heard something tumble down the canyon wall. I scanned the ledges to make sure I wasn't in the path of any larger rocks. After a while, I reached a narrower section where the path curved around a corner. It forced me to move closer to the cliff wall to avoid the edge. It wasn't a sheer drop, but it was steep enough to make me watch every step. My heartbeat was steady but heavier than usual. I knew I had to focus on my footing. The view was incredible, though. The canyon floor far below was filled with more rock formations, some dried-out plants, and a few scattered boulders. The sun hit that area at a sharp angle, creating bright patches of orange and brown. I kept walking, careful with my steps. Then I heard something I didn't expect. It sounded like a voice in the distance. It was low, but it carried a familiar tone. It seemed to echo off the canyon walls. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on my ears. I stopped for a moment and listened. I heard only the breeze. I told myself I was imagining things. I turned back to the path and continued walking. My legs felt tense. My hands gripped the straps of my backpack more firmly. I tried to shrug it off, but the idea of hearing my name out there alone gave me a strange feeling in my chest. Another half hour passed without anything odd. I stayed focused on the trail, watching for loose stones and sudden drops. The canyon kept narrowing in places and then opening up in others. I paused at a wider spot to drink more water. The wind picked up again, and I heard a soft sound that made me freeze. It was like a whisper. It didn't feel like a breeze swirling around, it felt more direct. My face got warm and my neck tensed up. I slowly looked around but saw no one. I swallowed, trying to get rid of a dry lump in my throat. I wanted to tell myself it was just the wind, but the whisper carried a tone that reminded me of a human voice. I pushed forward. The heat made me sweat, and my shirt clung to my back. I tried to control my breathing. I forced my thoughts to stay on the path and my next rest stop. I wanted to find a flat area to set up camp. I had read that there was a flat ledge near a small natural overhang, about another hour deeper into the canyon. The trail there was supposed to be level enough for a tent, so I kept going, though my nerves were on edge. About an hour later, I reached that spot. It wasn't very large, but it was enough for one tent. The rock surface was cracked in some places, but it looked sturdy. I shrugged off my backpack, took a moment to stretch, and then set up my tent. The sun was dipping lower by then, but I still had good light. I hammered the stakes in, pulled the tent tight, and made sure it was secure. I took out my small camping stove and heated some water for a freeze-dried meal. My body felt tired, and my stomach growled. I ate quickly, chewing on the flavorless bits of food while I looked at the canyon walls. They rose so high above me that I could only see a strip of sky. After dinner, I packed everything away and unrolled my sleeping mat inside the tent. The wind started to pick up again, and I heard that hum through the canyon. It seemed louder than before. I sat outside the tent on a flat rock, letting the evening air cool my face. The hum shifted into a more hollow sound. Then there was a distinct whispering noise echoing off the canyon walls. It sounded like someone calling my name. My heart pounded. The skin on the back of my neck felt prickly. I stood up, turned around, and aimed my flashlight at the rocks behind me. Nothing was there. I checked the ledges above me. No movement. I told myself it was the wind creating that effect. I reminded myself that canyons can carry sound in strange ways. I felt a chill in my arms, but I tried to stay calm. I stepped into my tent, zipped it up, and turned on my small lantern. I lay down on my sleeping mat, but I kept the lantern on. The walls of the tent shifted in the wind, making a faint flapping sound. My hands were still shaking a little. I listened for any sound outside. I heard the wind scrape across the rocks and swirl through the cracks. Then there was silence for a few minutes. Suddenly, there was a low moaning sound. It started somewhere near the canyon's entrance, or maybe deeper inside. It rolled through the air and seemed to bounce off the walls. I sat up, my mouth dry. The sound faded for a moment, then returned at a higher pitch. It felt close. I couldn't see anything outside, but the tent walls trembled. My heart raced. I whispered to myself to stay calm. I didn't want to panic alone in the dark. My legs were restless, and I could feel my pulse in my temples. I turned off the lantern to see if I could spot anything through the thin fabric of the tent. The darkness was overwhelming. My eyes adjusted after a few seconds, but I only saw faint shapes of the canyon walls. I considered stepping outside to look around, but my gut told me to wait. The moaning sound came again, this time on my left side. I heard the wind push against the rocks, but there was another tone underneath. It made my ears tingle. It was soft, yet it carried a pattern that reminded me of murmuring. I remembered stories about how canyons can create weird echoes. Some people say you can hear words or phrases if you listen long enough. I tried to rationalize it that way, but it felt personal. It felt like something in the canyon recognized me. My thoughts jumped back to the moment on the trail when I heard what sounded like my name. My hands were sweaty. I found myself holding my breath. I forced myself to inhale deeply and release it slowly. I wiped my palms on my sleeping bag, then reached for my flashlight. I knew I wouldn't sleep like this. I unzipped the tent and stuck my head out. The air was cool. I pointed my flashlight around, scanning the rocks and the small space around my campsite. I saw my own footprints in the dust. I saw the edges of the flat area and the drop-off into the lower section of the canyon. I saw the rough cliff walls, pockmarked and jagged. No one was there. But the wind was still howling and the canyon kept echoing. Every time the wind surged, I heard a faint whispering effect. My hands shook. My breath was shallow. I decided to stand up and walk around the campsite a bit, hoping it would calm me down. As I moved, I felt the rocks under my boots. I kept the flashlight aimed ahead, watching for loose stones. The darkness in the canyon was heavy. I couldn't see beyond the beam of my flashlight. That sense of being walled in made my chest tighten. I listened for anything that sounded like footsteps or movement. I only heard the wind. Occasionally it would fade, leaving total silence. Then, out of nowhere, I'd hear a faint whisper that made my scalp tighten. It repeated some syllables I couldn't make out. My name, maybe. Or maybe just random sounds. After a few minutes, I realized my nerves were getting worse. My heart was pounding too fast. My stomach felt tense. I decided to get back in the tent and try to rest. I zipped it up and secured the flap. I put the flashlight near my head, along with a small pocket knife. I wasn't sure if that would help, but it made me feel a little better. I lay down again, breathing through my nose, counting slowly to keep my heartbeat under control. Outside, the wind rose and fell in slow waves. Sleep didn't come easily. I think I drifted in and out of a light doze, but each gust of wind made me jolt awake. At one point, I heard a clear, deep whisper that seemed to circle my tent. My eyes flew open. My forehead was damp with sweat. I listened hard, but all I caught was the last echo of a rumble. I stayed still, hardly breathing, for what felt like several minutes. No new sounds came. Then the wind picked up again, and the canyon hummed. My muscles felt tight, and my arms were locked in place. I had a feeling that something was right outside the tent, but I couldn't hear any footsteps. I told myself it was just my imagination. Eventually, the wind died down. The canyon became quiet. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. I tried to stay awake, but my exhaustion took over. I must have fallen asleep around the middle of the night, because I opened my eyes to a faint blue light in the tent. Dawn was coming. I sat up, blinking. My body felt stiff. My shoulders were sore from tension. I unzipped the tent and looked out. The sky above the canyon was pale and clear. The temperature had dropped overnight. The air felt crisp, almost cold. I stepped out and stretched my arms. I looked around carefully. The campsite appeared exactly as I had left it. There were no footprints except my own. The ledge was empty, and the canyon was still. I listened for any echoes, but there was only a faint breeze. I felt a little relief. I started packing up my gear. I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. My hands moved quickly, folding the tent and securing it on my pack. I checked my water supply. I still had enough for the hike back. I ate a quick breakfast bar and then headed toward the trail that led out of the canyon. I kept my eyes and ears alert. The wind was gentle and the morning sun was climbing. I felt the warmth on my face as I walked. My legs were tense, and my footsteps felt heavier than the day before. I glanced at the canyon walls rising above me. My mouth felt dry. I still remembered the whispers from the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that the canyon had been trying to communicate. As I moved through the winding paths and occasional switchbacks, I noticed how the wind changed pitch when it passed through different gaps. Sometimes it made a higher sound. Sometimes it made a lower drone. I thought back to the night before and realized how those variations could resemble voices. I stayed focused on reaching the entrance, double-checking each foothold. I didn't want to linger. My adrenaline kept me moving at a brisk pace. At last, I saw the larger, wider opening where I had first started. My truck was still there, covered in a layer of dust. I felt my shoulders relax a bit. I reached the vehicle, threw my backpack in the bed, and took a long drink of water. My shirt was damp with sweat. My face was coated in dust, and I wiped it off with a rag. I stood there for a moment, looking back into the canyon. The walls were towering and silent in the early light. No breeze, no whispers. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and headed back down the dirt road. My hands were tight on the wheel. My mind kept drifting to the sounds I'd heard the day before. I told myself it had to be natural echoes. But my skin still crawled when I remembered that whisper repeating what I thought was my name. I had never experienced anything like that on a hike. I've tackled rougher trails and steeper cliffs without losing my nerve, but something in that canyon unsettled me in a way I can't explain. Even now I remember those echoes. I remember the way the wind carried them. I don't know if the place holds ancient voices or if it was just my imagination. All I know is that I felt watched. I felt like the canyon wanted me to hear it. I kept driving until the canyon was a faint outline in my rearview mirror. My shoulders eventually loosened. My breathing returned to normal, but my thoughts were stuck on every noise I heard that night. I have no proof that anything impossible happened, but I'm certain I heard something calling my name in that canyon. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. Still, I'm not sure I want to go back and find out. That place felt like it was watching me, and I don't need a second invitation from a canyon that whispers. I felt uneasy the moment I stepped onto the front porch of that old mansion. The sky was overcast and there was a thick, cold air around the property. I remember looking up at the tall windows and feeling something settle in my gut, like a warning. I couldn't tell if it was excitement or dread, but I knew I had to find out what this weekend would bring. I arrived late in the afternoon. The collector, a man named Gregory, greeted me with a firm handshake and a quick nod. He was polite, but he didn't smile much. I'd met him a few times in more casual settings, and he always struck me as a focused, driven person, someone who rarely showed emotion. He led me inside without much small talk. The first thing I noticed was the long foyer with high ceilings and old paintings. The air had a stale smell, like the house hadn't been properly aired out in a while. I heard the soft hum of a distant radiator, and the floor creaked under my shoes when I walked. Gregory handed me a key to a room on the second floor and told me I could settle in and explore at my own pace. I climbed the wide staircase and felt my legs tense with each step. The stairs groaned, and every sound echoed through the hallway above. My room had a tall wooden door that squeaked when I opened it. Inside, the space looked like it hadn't changed since the early 20th century. There was a large bed with a wooden headboard, a wardrobe in the corner, and a single window facing the front yard. A thick layer of dust coated the nightstand. I put my bag down and tested the mattress by pressing my palm into it. It felt firm, almost rigid. The entire room smelled like old fabric and furniture polish. I opened the window to let some fresh air in, but only a weak breeze came through. I decided to take a short walk around the corridors before dinner. I passed by several closed doors and a few open ones. Inside those open rooms, I saw old furniture, covered chairs, and a couple of statues with chipped paint. The place looked more like a personal museum than a welcoming home. The floors were made of dark wood, and they emitted soft groans whenever I stepped on certain spots. The walls were lined with paintings in ornate frames. Each painting showed a person in old-fashioned clothing, posing with a neutral or slightly stern expression. Some wore suits, others wore dresses with lace collars. Their eyes seemed intense, almost too detailed. I remember thinking that the artist must have been very skilled, because each gaze felt alive. Gregory appeared in the hallway and told me dinner was served downstairs. He led me to a dining room that had a long table set with simple plates and silverware. A single chandelier hung above the table, flickering slightly because one of the bulbs was going out. I sat down and he joined me across the table. We ate roast beef, potatoes, and steamed vegetables. The food tasted fine, though it had a bland, almost mass-produced feel. Gregory didn't say much. He asked me about my drive and whether the roads were clear. I told him it was an easy trip. Then he nodded and changed the subject to his art collection. He mentioned that many of the portraits I'd seen were original pieces, some dating back over a century. After dinner, I returned to the corridors. Gregory went to his study. I heard the door close behind him and a click of what sounded like a lock. I didn't feel comfortable snooping too close, so I stuck to the well-lit areas. As I walked, I paid more attention to the details on the walls. The paintings weren't labeled, but I noticed small metal plaques on the frames. The names didn't ring any bells for me, but I assumed these people were from various walks of life. Some might have been minor nobles, others wealthy merchants or important figures. Their expressions were the part that drew me in. Some were stern, some were playful,